Section 30 of the Arabian Nights Entertainments Volume 1. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Jonathan Feldman. The Arabian Nights Entertainments Volume 1 by Anonymous, translated by Dr. Jonathan Scott, Section 30. At last they came to the gates of the vizier, who little thought his nephew was so near. The doorkeepers, to prevent any disorder, kept back all the slaves that carried torches, and would not admit them. Buddir ad-Din was likewise refused, but the musicians, who had free entrance, stood still, and protested they would not go in if they hindered him from accompanying them. "He is not one of the slaves," said they. "Look upon him, and you will soon be satisfied. He is certainly a young stranger, who is curious to see the ceremonies observed at marriages in this city." And saying thus, they put him in the midst of them, and carried him with them in spite of the porters. They took his torch out of his hand, gave it to the first they met, and having brought him into the hall, placed him at the right hand of the hump-backed bridegroom, who sat near the vizier's daughter on a throne most richly adorned. She appeared very lovely, but in her face there was nothing to be seen but vexation and grief. The cause of this was easily to be guessed, when she had by her side a bridegroom so very deformed, and so unworthy of her love. The nuptial seat was in the midst of an estrade. The ladies of the emirs, viziers, those of the sultan's bedchamber, and several other ladies of the court and city were placed on each side, a little lower, every one according to her rank, and richly dressed, holding a large wax taper in her hands. When they saw Buddir ad-Din Houssun, they all fixed their eyes upon him, and admiring his shape, his behaviour, and the beauty of his face, they could not forbear looking upon him. When he was seated, every one left their seats, came near to him to have a full view of his face, and all found themselves moved with love and admiration. The disparity between Buddir ad-Din Houssun and the humpbacked groom, who made such a contemptible figure, occasioned great murmuring among the company, insomuch that the ladies cried out, "We must give our bride to this handsome young gentleman, and not to this ugly humpback." Nor did they rest here, but uttered imprecations against the sultan, who, abusing his absolute power, would unite ugliness and beauty together. They also mocked the bridegroom, so as to put him out of countenance, to the great satisfaction of the spectators, whose shouts for some time put a stop to the concert of music in the hall. At last the musicians began again, and the women who had dressed the bride surrounded her. Each time that the bride retired to change her dress, she, on her return, passed by humpback without giving him one look, and went towards Buddir ad-Din, before whom she presented herself in her new attire. On this occasion, Buddir ad-Din, according to the instructions given him by the genie, failed not to put his hands in his purse, and pulled out handfuls of sequins which he distributed among the women that followed the bride. Nor did he forget the players and dancers, but also threw money to them. It was pleasant to see how they pushed one another to gather it up. They shewed themselves thankful for his liberality. When the ceremony of changing habits was past, the music ceased and the company retired. The bride repaired to the nuptial chamber, whither her attendants followed to undress her, and none remained in the hall but the humpback groom, Buddir ad-Din, and some of the domestics. Humpback, who was enraged at Buddir ad-Din, suspecting him to be his rival, gave him a cross look, and said, "And thou? What dost thou wait for? Why art thou not gone as well as the rest? Depart." Buddir ad-Din, having no pretence to stay, withdrew, not knowing what to do with himself. But before he got out of the vestibule, the genie and the peri met him and stopped him. "Whither are you going?" said the peri. "Stay, humpback is not in the hall. Return, and introduce yourself into the bride's chamber. As soon as you are alone with her, tell her boldly that you are her husband, that the sultan's intention was only to make sport with the groom. In the meantime, we will take care that the humpback shall not return, and let nothing hinder your passing the night with your bride, for she is yours and not his." While the peri thus encouraged Buddir ad-Din, and instructed him how he should behave himself, Humpback had really gone out of the room for a moment. The genie went to him in the shape of a monstrous cat, mewing at a most fearful rate. Humpback called to the cat. He clapped his hands to drive her away, but instead of retreating, she stood upon her hinder feet, staring with eyes like fire, looking fiercely at him, mewing louder than she did at first, and increasing in size until she was large as an ass. At this sight, Humpback would have cried out for help, but his fear was so great that he stood gaping and could not utter one word. That he might have no time to recover, the genie changed himself immediately into a large buffalo, and in this stripe called to him with a voice that redoubled his fear. "Thou, humpbacked villain!" At these words the affrighted groom cast himself upon the ground, and covering his face with his vest, that he might not see this dreadful beast, "Sovereign Prince of Buffaloes," said he, "what is it you want of me?" "Woe be to thee," replied the genie. "Hast thou the presumption to venture to marry my mistress?" "O my lord," said Humpback, "I pray you to pardon me. If I am guilty, it is through ignorance. I did not know that this lady had a buffalo to her sweetheart. Command me in anything you please. I give you my oath that I am ready to obey you." "By death," replied the genie, "if thou goest out from hence, or speakest a word till the sun rises, I will crush thy head to pieces. I warn thee to obey, for if thou hast the impudence to return, it shall cost thee thy life." When the genie had done speaking, he transformed himself into the shape of a man, took Humpback by the legs, and after having set him against the wall with his head downwards, "If thou stir," said he, "before the sun rise, as I have told thee already, I will take thee by the heels again, and dash thy head in 1,000 pieces against the wall." To return to Buddir ad-Deen. Prompted by the genie and the presence of the Peri, he returned to the hall, from whence he slipped into the bride chamber, where he sat down, expecting the success of his adventure. After a while the bride arrived, conducted by an old matron, who came no farther than the door, without looking in to see whether it were Humpback or another that was there, and then retired. The beautiful bride was agreeably surprised to find, instead of Humpback, a handsome youth, who gracefully addressed her. "What, my dear friend," said she, "by your being here at this time of night, you must be my husband's comrade." "No, madam," said Buddir ad-Deen, "I am of another quality than that ugly Humpback." "But," said she, "you do not consider that you speak degradingly of my husband." "He your husband?" replied he. "Can you retain those thoughts so long? Be convinced of your mistake, for so much beauty must never be sacrificed to the most contemptible of mankind. It is I that am the happy mortal for whom it is reserved. The Sultan had a mind to make himself merry by putting this trick upon the vizier your father, but he chose me to be your real husband. You might have observed how the ladies, the musicians, the dancers, your women, and all the servants of your family were pleased with this comedy. We have sent Humpback to his stable again." At this discourse, the vizier's daughter, who was more like one dead than alive when she came into the bride chamber, put on a gay air, which made her so handsome that Buddir ad-Deen was charmed with her graces. "I did not expect," said she, "to meet with so pleasing a surprise, and I had condemned myself to live unhappy all my days. But my good fortune is so much the greater that I possess in you a man worthy of my tenderest affection." Buddir ad-Deen, overjoyed to see himself possessor of so many charms, retired with his bride, and laid his vesture aside, with the bag that he had from the Jew, which, notwithstanding all the money he had dispersed, was still full. Towards morning, while the two lovers were asleep, the genie, who had met again with the Peri, said, "It is time to finish off what we have so successfully carried on. Let us not be overtaken by daylight, which will soon appear. Go you and bring off the young man again without awaking him." The Peri went into the bedchamber, where the two lovers were fast asleep, took up Buddir ad-Deen in his undervest and drawers, and in company with the genie, with wonderful swiftness, fled away with him to the gates of Damascus in Syria, where they arrived just at the time when the officers of the mosques, appointed for that end, were calling the people to prayers at break of day. The Peri laid Buddir ad-Din softly on the ground, close by the gate, and departed with the genie. The gate of the city being opened, and many people assembled, they were surprised to see a youth lying in his shirt and drawers upon the ground. One said, "He has been hard put to it to get away from his mistress, that he could not get time to put on his clothes." "Look," said another, "how people expose themselves. Sure enough, he has spent most part of the night in drinking with his friends, till he has got drunk, and then perhaps, having occasion to go out, instead of returning, is come this length, and not having his senses about him, was overtaken with sleep." Others were of another opinion, but nobody could guess what had been the real occasion of his coming thither. A small puff of wind happened to blow at this time, uncovered his breast, which was whiter than snow. Every one being struck with admiration at the fineness of his complexion, they spoke so loud that they awakened him. His surprise was as great as theirs when he found himself at the gate of a city where he had never been before, and encompassed by a crowd of people gazing at him. "Inform me," said he, "for God's sake, where I am, and what you would have." One of the crowd spoke to him, saying, "Young man, the gates of the city were just now opened, and as we came out, we found you lying here in this condition. Have you lain here all night? And do not you know that you are at one of the gates of Damascus?" "At one of the gates of Damascus?" answered Buddir ad-Din. "Surely you mock me. When I lay down to sleep last night, I was at Cairo." When he had said this, some of the people, moved with compassion for him, exclaimed, "It is a pity that such a handsome young man should have lost his senses," and so went away. "My son," said an old man to him, "you know not what you say. How is it possible that you, being this morning at Damascus, could be last night at Cairo?" "It is true," said Buddir ad-Din, "and I swear to you that I was all day yesterday at Bassorah." He had no sooner said this than all the people fell into a fit of laughter, and cried out, "He's a fool! He's a madman!" There were some, however, that pitied him because of his youth, and one among the company said to him, "My son, you must certainly be crazed. You do not consider what you say. Is it possible that a man could be yesterday at Bassorah, at the same night at Cairo, and this morning at Damascus? Surely you are asleep still. Come, rouse up your spirits." "What I say," answered Buddir ad-Din Houssan, "is so true that last night I was married in the city of Cairo." All those who laughed before could not forbear again at this declaration. "Recollect yourself," said the same person who spoke before. "You must have dreamt all this, and the fancy still possesses your brain." "I am sensible of what I say," answered the young man. "Pray, can you tell me how it was possible for me to go in a dream to Cairo, where I am very certain I was in person, where my bride was 7 times brought before me, each time dressed in a different habit, and where I saw an ugly humpbacked fellow to whom they intended to give her? Besides, I want to know what is become of my vest, my turban, and the bag of sequins I had at Cairo." Though he assured them that all these things were matters of fact, yet they could not forbear to laugh at him, which put him in such confusion that he knew not what to think of all these adventures. After Buddir ad-Din Houssan had confidently affirmed all that he said to be true, he rose up to go into the town, and everyone who followed him called out, "A madman! A fool!" Upon this, some looked out at their windows, some came to their doors, and others joined with those that were about him, calling out as they did, "A madman!" but not knowing for what. In this perplexity, the affrighted young man happened to come before a pastry cook's shop, and went into it to avoid the rabble. This pastry cook had formerly been captain to a troop of Arabian robbers, who plundered the caravans, and though he was become a citizen of Damascus, where he behaved himself to everyone's satisfaction, yet he was dreaded by all who knew him, wherefore, as soon as he came out to the rabble who followed Buddir ad-Din, they dispersed. The pastry cook asked him who he was, and what brought him thither. Buddir ad-Din told him all, not concealing his birth, nor the death of his father the Grand Vizier. He afterwards gave him an account of why he had left Bassorah, how, After he had fallen asleep the night following upon his father's tomb, he found himself when he awoke at Cairo, where he had married a lady, and at last, in what amazement he was, when he found himself at Damascus, without being able to penetrate into all those wonderful adventures. "Your history is one of the most surprising," said the pastry cook, "but if you will follow my advice, you will let no man know these matters you have revealed to me, but patiently wait till heaven thinks fit to put an end to your misfortunes. You shall be welcome to stay with me till then, and as I have no children, I will own you for my son, if you consent. After you are so adopted, you may freely walk the city without being exposed any more to the insults of the rabble." Though this adoption was below the son of a Grand Vizier, Buddir ad-Din was glad to accept of the pastry cook's proposal, judging it the best thing he could do, considering his circumstances. The cook clothed him, called for witnesses, and went before a notary, where he acknowledged him for his son. After this, Buddir ad-Din lived with him under the name of Hassan, and learned the pastry trade. While this passed at Damascus, the daughter of Shums ad-Din awoke, and finding Buddir ad-Din had gone, supposed he had risen softly for fear of disturbing her, but would soon return. As she was in expectation of him, her father the vizier, who was vexed at the affront put upon him by the sultan, came and knocked at her chamber door to bewail her sad destiny. He called her by her name, and she, knowing him by his voice, immediately got up and opened the door. She kissed his hand, and received him with so much pleasure in her countenance that she surprised the vizier, who expected to find her drowned in tears, and as much aggrieved as himself. "Unhappy wretch," he said in a passion, "do you appear before me thus, after the hideous sacrifice you have just consummated? Can you see me with so much satisfaction?" The new bride, seeing her father angry at her pleasant countenance, said to him, "For God's sake, sir, do not reproach me wrongfully. It is not the humpback fellow whom I abhor more than death. It is not that monster I have married. Everybody laughed him to scorn, and put him so out of countenance that he was forced to run away and hide himself, to make room for a noble youth who is my real husband." "What fable do you tell me?" said Shums ad-Din roughly. "What? Did not Crookback lie with you tonight?" "No, sir," said she. "It was the youth I mentioned, who has large eyes and black eyebrows." At these words the vizier lost all his patience, and exclaimed in anger, "Ah, wicked woman, you will make me distracted." "It is you, father," said she, "that put me out of my senses by your incredulity." "So, it is not true," replied the vizier, "that humpback—" "Let us talk no more of humpback," said she. "A curse upon humpback! Father, I assure you once more that I did not bed with him, but with my dear spouse, whom I believe is not far off." Shums ad-Din went out to seek him, but instead of seeing Buddir ad-Din, was surprised to find humpback with his head on the ground and his heels uppermost, as the genie had set him against the wall. "What is the meaning of this?" said he. "Who placed you thus?" Crookback, knowing it to be the vizier, answered, "Alas, alas! It is you then that would marry me to the mistress of a genie in the form of a buffalo." Shums ad-Din Mabumud, when he heard humpback speak thus, thought he was raving, bade him to move and stand upon his legs. "I will take care how I stir," said humpback, "unless the sun be risen. Know, sir, that when I came last night to your palace, suddenly a black cat appeared to me, and in an instant grew as big as a buffalo. I have not forgotten what he enjoined me, therefore you may depart and leave me here." The vizier, instead of going away, took him by the heels and made him stand up, when humpback ran off without looking behind him, and coming to the palace presented himself to the sultan, who laughed heartily when he informed how the genie had served him. Shums ad-Din returned to his daughter's chamber, more astonished than before. "My abused daughter," said he, "can you give me no farther light in this miraculous affair?" "Sir," replied she, "I can give you no other account than I have done already. Here are my husband's clothes, which he put off last night. Perhaps you might find something among them that may solve your doubt." She then shewed him Buddir ad-Din's turban, which he examined narrowly on all sides, saying, "I should take this to be a vizier's turban, if it were not made after the Bassorah fashion." But perceiving something to be sewn between the stuff and the lining, he called for scissors, and having unripped it, found the paper which Nur ad-Din Ali had given to his son upon his deathbed, and which Buddir ad-Din Hosan had sewn into his turban for security. Shams ad-Din, having opened the paper, knew his brother's hand, and found this superscription, "For my son Buddir ad-Din Hosan." Before he could make any reflections upon it, his daughter delivered him the bag that lay under the garments, which he likewise opened, and found it full of sequins, for, notwithstanding all the liberality of Buddir ad-Din, it was still kept full by the genie and the peri. He read the following words upon the note in the bag: 1,000 sequins belonging to Isaac the Jew. And these lines underneath, which the Jew had written: "Delivered to my lord Buddir ad-Din Hosan for the cargo of the first of those ships that formerly belonged to the noble vizier, his father, of blessed memory, sold to me upon its arrival in this place." He had scarcely read these words when he groaned heavily and fainted away. The vizier, Shams ad-Din, being recovered from his fit by the aid of his daughter and the women she called to her assistance, "Daughter," said he, "do not alarm yourself at this accident, occasioned by what is scarcely credible. Your bridegroom is your cousin, the son of my beloved and deceased brother. The 1,000 sequins in the bag reminds me of a quarrel I had with him, and is without the dowry he gives you. God be praised for all things, and particularly for this miraculous adventure, which demonstrates his almighty power." Then, looking again upon his brother's writing, he kissed it several times, shedding abundance of tears. He looked over the book from beginning to end. In it he found the date of his brother's arrival at Bassorah, of his marriage, and of the date of birth of his son, and when he compared them with the day of his own marriage and the birth of his daughter at Cairo, he wondered at the exact coincidence which appeared in every circumstance. The happy discovery put him into such a transport of joy that he took the book with the ticket of the bag and shewed them to the Sultan, who pardoned what was past, and was so much pleased with the relation of this adventure that he caused it with all its circumstances to be put in writing for the information of posterity. Meanwhile the vizier, Shams ad-Din, could not comprehend the reason why his nephew did not appear. He expected him every moment, and was impatient to receive him to his arms. After he had waited 7 days in vain, he searched through all Cairo, but could procure no intelligence of him, which threw him into great perplexity. "This is the strangest occurrence," said he, "that ever happened." In order to certify it, he thought fit to draw up in writing, with his own hands, an account of the manner in which the bedchamber was furnished, with the other circumstances. He likewise made the turban, the bag, and the rest of Buddir ad-Din's raiment into a bundle, and locked them up. After some days were past, the vizier's daughter perceived herself pregnant, and after 9 months was brought to bed of a son. A nurse was provided for the child, besides other women and slaves to wait upon him, and his grandfather called him Agib. When young Agib had attained the age of 7, the vizier, instead of teaching him to read at home, put him to school with a master who was in great esteem, and 2 slaves were ordered to wait upon him. Agib used to play with his schoolfellows, and as they were all inferior to him in rank, they shewed him great respect, according to the example of their master, who many times would pass by faults in him that he would correct in his other pupils. This indulgence spoiled Agib. He became proud and insolent, and would have his playfellows bear all from him, and would submit to nothing from them, but be master everywhere, and if any took the liberty to thwart him, he would call them 1,000 names, and many times beat them. In short, all the scholars grew weary of his insolence, and complained of him to their master. He answered, that they must have patience. But when he saw that Agib grew still more and more overbearing, and occasioned him much trouble, "Children," said he to his scholars, "I find Agib is a little insolent gentleman. I will show you how to mortify him, so that he shall never torment you any more. Nay, I believe it will make him leave the school. When he comes again tomorrow, place yourselves round him, and let one of you call out, 'Come, let us play,' but upon condition that everyone who desires to play shall tell his own name, and the names of his father and mother. They who refuse shall be esteemed bastards, and not be suffered to play in our company." Next day, when they were gathered together, they failed not to follow their master's instruction. They placed themselves round Agib, and one of them called out, "Let us begin a play, but on condition that he who cannot tell his own name and that of his father and mother shall not play at all." They all cried out, and so did Agib, "We consent." Then he that spoke first asked everyone the question, and all fulfilled the condition except Agib, who answered, "My name is Agib, my mother is called the Lady of Beauty, and my father Shams ad-Din Mahmud, vizier to the Sultan." At these words, all the children cried out, "Agib, what do you say? That is not the name of your father, but your grandfather." "A curse on you," said he in a passion. "What? Dare you say that the vizier is not my father?" "No, no," cried they with great laughter. "He is your grandfather, and you shall not play with us. Nay, we will take care how we come into your company." Having spoken thus, they all left him, scoffing him, and laughing among themselves, which mortified Agib so much that he wept. The schoolmaster, who was near, and heard all that passed, came up, and speaking to Agib, said, "Agib, do not you know that the vizier is not your father, but your grandfather, and the father of your mother, the Lady of Beauty? We know not the name of your father any more than you do. We only know that the Sultan was going to marry your mother to one of his grooms, a humpback fellow, but a genie lay with her. This is hard upon you, but ought to teach you to treat your schoolfellows with less haughtiness." Agib, being nettled at this, ran hastily out of the school. He went directly sobbing to his mother's chamber, who, being alarmed to see him thus grieved, asked the reason. He could not answer for tears, so great was his mortification, and it was long ere he could speak plain enough to repeat what had been said to him, and had occasioned his sorrow. When he came to himself, "Mother," said he, "for the love of God, be pleased to tell me who is my father." "My son," she replied, "Shams ad-Din Mahmud, who every day caresses you kindly, is your father." "You do not tell me truth," returned Agib. "He is your father, and none of mine. But whose son am I?" At this question, the Lady of Beauty, calling to mind her wedding night, which had been succeeded by a long widowhood, began to shed tears, repining bitterly at the loss of so handsome a husband as Buddir ad-Din. Whilst the Lady of Beauty and Agib were both weeping, the vizier entered, who demanded the reason of their sorrow. The lady told him the shame Agib had undergone at school, which so much affected the vizier that he joined his tears with theirs, and judging from this that the misfortune which had happened to his daughter was the common discourse of the town, he was mortified to the quick. Being thus afflicted, he went to the Sultan's palace, and falling prostrate at his feet, most humbly entreated permission to make a journey in search of his nephew Buddir ad-Din Husayn, for he could not bear any longer that the people of the city should believe a genie had disgraced his daughter. The Sultan was much concerned at the vizier's affliction, approved his resolution, and gave him leave to travel. He caused a passport also to be written for him, requesting in the strongest terms all kings and princes in whose dominions Buddir ad-Din might sojourn, to grant that the vizier might conduct him to Cairo. Shams ad-Din, not knowing how to express his gratitude to the Sultan, fell down before him a second time, while the floods of tears he shed bore sufficient testimony to his feelings. At last, having wished the Sultan all manner of prosperity, he took his leave and returned to his house, where he disposed everything for his journey, and the preparations were carried on with so much diligence that in 4 days after he left the city, accompanied with his daughter the Lady of Beauty and his grandson Agib. They travelled 19 days without intermission, but on the 20th, arriving at a pleasant mead, a small distance from the gate of Damascus, they halted and pitched their tents upon the banks of a river which fertilizes the vicinity and runs through the town, one of the pleasantest in Syria, once the capital of the caliphs, and celebrated for its elegant buildings, the politeness of its inhabitants, and the abundance of its conveniences. The vizier declared he would stay in that pleasant place 2 days, and pursue his journey on the third. In the meantime, he gave his retinue leave to go to Damascus, and almost all of them made use of it, some of them influenced by curiosity to see a city they had heard so much of, and others by the opportunity of vending the Egyptian goods they had brought with them, or buying stuffs and the rarities of the country. The beautiful lady, desiring her son Agib might share in the satisfaction of viewing that celebrated city, ordered the black eunuch, who acted in quality of his governor, to conduct him thither. Agib, in magnificent apparel, went with the eunuch, who had a large cane in his hand. They had no sooner entered the city than Agib, fair and glorious as the day, attracted the eyes of the people. Some got out of their houses to gain a nearer and narrower view of him. Others put their heads out of the windows, and those who passed along the street were not satisfied in stopping to look upon him, but kept pace with him to prolong the pleasure of the agreeable sight. In fine, there was not a person that did not admire him, and bestow 1,000 benedictions on the father and mother that had given being to so fine a child. By chance, the eunuch and he passed by the shop of Buddir ad-Din Husayn, and there the crowd was so great that they were forced to halt. The pastry cook, who had adopted Buddir ad-Din Husayn, had died some years before, and left him his shop and all his property, and he conducted the pastry trade so dexterously that he had gained great reputation in Damascus. Buddir ad-Din, seeing so great a crowd before his door, who were gazing so attentively upon Agib and the black eunuch, stepped out to see them himself. Having cast his eyes upon Agib, Buddir ad-Din found himself moved, he knew not how, nor for what reason. He was not struck like the people with the brilliant beauty of the boy. Another cause, unknown to him, gave rise to the uneasiness and emotion he felt. It was the force of blood that wrought in this tender father, who, laying aside his business, made up to Agib, and with an engaging air said to him, "My little lord, who hast won my soul, be so kind as to come into my shop, and eat a bit of such fare as I have, that I may have the pleasure of admiring you at my ease." These words he pronounced with such tenderness that tears trickled from his eyes. Little Agib was moved when he saw his emotion, and turning to the eunuch, said, "This honest man speaks in such an affectionate manner that I cannot avoid complying with his request. Let us step into his house and taste his pastry." "It would be a fine thing, truly," replied the slave, "to see the son of a vizier go into a pastry cook's shop to eat. Do not imagine that I will suffer any such thing." "Alas, my lord," cried Buddir ad-Din, "it is cruelty to trust the conduct of you in the hands of a person who treats you so harshly." Then, applying himself to the eunuch, "My good friend," continued he, "pray do not hinder this young lord from granting me the favour I ask. Do not put such mortification upon me. Rather, do me the honour to walk in along with him, and by so doing, you will let the world know that though the outside is brown like a chestnut, your inside is as white. Do you know," continued he, "that I am master of the secret to make you white instead of being black as you are?" This set the eunuch a-laughing, and then he asked what the secret was. "I will tell you," replied Buddir ad-Din, who repeated some verses in praise of black eunuchs, implying that it was by their ministry that the honour of princes and all great men was secured. The eunuch was so charmed with these verses that, without further hesitation, he suffered Agib to go into the shop, and went in with him himself. Buddir ad-Din Husayn was so overjoyed at having obtained what he had so passionately desired, and, falling again to the work he had discontinued, "I was making," said he, "cream tarts, and you must, with submission, eat of them. I am persuaded you will find them good, for my own mother, who made them incomparably well, taught me, and the people send to buy them of me from all quarters of town." This said, He took a cream tart out of the oven, and after strewing upon it some pomegranate kernels and sugar, set it before Agib, who found it very delicious. Another was served up to the eunuch, and he gave the same judgment. End of section 30.
Section 31 of the Arabian Nights Entertainments, Volume 1. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Lars Rolander. The Arabian Nights Entertainments, Volume 1, by Anonymous, translated by Dr. Jonathan Scott. Section 31. The Story of Nur ad-Din Ali and Budr ad-Din Husn, Part C. While they were both eating, Budr ad-Din viewed Ajib very attentively, and after looking upon him again and again, it came into his mind that possibly he might have such a son by his charming wife, from whom he had been so soon and so cruelly separated, and the very thought drew tears from his eyes. He intended to have put some questions to little Ajib about his journey to Damascus, but the child had no time to gratify his curiosity, for the eunuch, pressing him to return to his grandfather's tent, took him away as soon as he had done eating. Budr ad-Din Husn, not contented with looking after him, shut up his shop immediately and followed him. Budr ad-Din Husn ran after Ajib and the eunuch, and overtook them before they had reached the gate of the city. The eunuch, perceiving he followed them, was extremely surprised. "You impertinent fellow," said he, with an angry tone, "what do you want?" "My dear friend," replied Budr ad-Din, "do not trouble yourself. I have a little business out of town, and I must needs go and look after it." This answer, however, did not at all satisfy the eunuch, whom, turning to Ajib, said, "This is all owing to you. I foresaw that I should repent of my complaisance. You would needs go into the man's shop. It was not wisely done in me to give you leave." "Perhaps," replied Ajib, "he has real business out of town, and the road is free to everybody." While this passed, they kept walking together, without looking behind them, till they came near the vizier's tent, upon which they turned about to see if Budr ad-Din followed them. Ajib, perceiving he was within 2 paces of him, reddened and whitened alternately, according to the different emotions that affected him. He was afraid the Grand Vizier, his grandfather, should come to know he had been in the pastry shop, and had eaten there. In this dread he took up a large stone that lay at his foot, and throwing it at Budr ad-Din, hit him in the forehead, and wounded him so that his face was covered with blood. The eunuch gave Budr ad-Din to understand he had no reason to complain of a mischance that he had merited and brought upon himself. Budr ad-Din turned towards the city, staunching the blood of the wound with his apron, which he had not put off. "I was a fool," said he within himself, "for leaving my house to take so much pains about this brat, for doubtless he would never have used me after this manner if he had not thought I had some ill design against him." When he got home, he had his wound dressed, and softened the sense of his mischance by the reflection that there was an infinite number of people upon the earth who were yet more unfortunate than he. Budr ad-Din kept on the pastry trade at Damascus, and his uncle Shumsi ad-Din Mahmud went from thence 3 days after his arrival. He went by way of Emos, Hanach and Khaleb, then crossed the Euphrates, and after passing through Mardin, Mosul, Sinjar, Diyarbekir, and several other towns, arrived at last at Bussorah. Immediately after his arrival he desired audience of the Sultan, who was no sooner informed of his quality than he admitted him to his presence, received him very favourably, and inquired the occasion of his journey to Bussorah. "Sire," replied the vizier, "I come to know what is become of the son of my brother, who has had the honour to serve your Majesty?" "Nur ad-Din Ali," said the Sultan, "has been long dead. As for his son, all I can tell you of him is that he disappeared suddenly about 2 months after his father's death, and nobody has seen him since, notwithstanding all the inquiry I ordered to be made. But his mother, who is the daughter of one of my viziers, is still alive. Shumse ad-Din Mahmud desired leave of the Sultan to take her to Egypt, and having obtained permission, without waiting till the next day, inquired after her place of abode, and at that very hour went to her house, accompanied with his daughter and his grandson. The widow of Nur ad-Din Ali resided still in the same place where her husband had lived. It was stately fabric, adorned with marble pillars, but Shumse ad-Din did not stop to view it. At his entry he kissed the gate, and the piece of marble upon which his brother's name was written in letters of gold. He asked to speak with his sister-in-law, and was told by her servants that she was in a small building covered by a dome, to which they directed in the middle of the very spacious court. This tender mother used to spend the greatest part of the day and night in that room, which she had built as a representation of the tomb of her son Budr ad-Din Hushun, whom she supposed to be dead after so long an absence. She was pouring tears over his memorial when Shumse ad-Din, entering, found her buried in the deepest affliction. He made his compliment, and after beseeching her to suspend her tears and sighs, informed her he had the honour to be her brother-in-law, and acquainted her with the reason of his journey from Cairo to Bussorah. Shumse ad-Din Mahmud, after acquainting his sister-in-law with all that had passed at Cairo on his daughter's wedding night, and informing her of the surprise occasioned by the discovery of the papers sewed up in Budr ad-Din's turban, presented to her Ajib and the beautiful lady. The widow of Nur ad-Din, who had still continued sitting like a woman dejected, and weaned from the affairs of this world, no sooner understood by his discourse that her dear son, whom she lamented so bitterly, might still be alive, than she arose and repeatedly embraced the beautiful lady and her grandchild Ajib, and perceiving in the youth the features of Budr ad-Din, drops tears different from what she had been so long accustomed to shed. She could not forbear kissing the youth, who for his part received her embraces with all the demonstrations of joy he was capable of shewing. "Sister," said Shumse ad-Din, "it is time to dry your tears and suppress your sighs. You must think of going with us to Egypt. The Sultan of Bussorah gives me leave to carry you thither, and I doubt not you will consent. I am in hopes we shall at last find out your son, my nephew, and if we do, the history of him, of you, of my own daughter, and of my own adventures will deserve to be committed to writing and transmitted to posterity." The widow of Nur ad-Din heard this proposal with pleasure, and ordered preparations to be made for her departure. While they were making, Shumse ad-Din desired a second audience, and after taking leave of the Sultan, who dismissed him with ample marks of respect, and gave him a considerable present for himself, and another of great value for the Sultan of Egypt, he set out from Bussorah once more for the city of Damascus. When he arrived in the neighbourhood of Damascus, he ordered his tents to be pitched without the gate, at which he designed to enter the city, and gave out he would tarry there 3 days, to give his suit rest and buy up curiosities to present to the Sultan of Egypt. While he was employed in selecting the finest stuffs which the principal merchants had brought to his tents, Ajib begged the black eunuch, his governor, to carry him through the city, in order to see what he had not had leisure to view before, and to inquire what was become of the pastry cook whom he had wounded. The eunuch, complying with his request, went along with him towards the city, after leave obtained of the beautiful lady his mother. They entered Damascus by the Paradise Gate, which lay next to the tents of the vizier. They walked through the great squares and the public places where the richest goods were sold, and took a view of the superb mosque at the hour of prayer, between noon and sunset. When they passed by the shop of Buddir ad-Din Husn, whom they still found employed in making cream tarts. "I salute you, sir," said Ajib. "Do you know me? Do you remember you ever saw me before?" Buddir ad-Din, hearing these words, fixed his eyes upon him, and recognizing him, such was the surprising effect of paternal love, felt the same emotion as when he saw him first. He was confused, and instead of making any answer, continued a long time without uttering a word. At length, recovering himself, "My lord," said he, "be so kind as to come once more with your governor into my house, and taste a cream tart. I beg your lordship's pardon for the trouble I gave you in following you out of town. I was at that time not myself. I did not know what I did. You drew me after you. After the violence of the attraction was so soft that I could not withstand it." Ajib, astonished at what Buddir ad-Din said, replied, "There is an excess in the kindness you express, and unless you engaged under oath not to follow me when I go from hence, I will not enter your house. If you give me your promise and prove a man of your word, I will visit you again tomorrow, since the vizier, my grandfather, is still employed in buying up rarities for a present to the Sultan of Egypt." "My lord," replied Buddir ad-Din, "I will do whatever you would have me." This said, Ajib and the eunuch went into the shop. Presently, after Buddir ad-Din set before them a cream tart that was full as good as what they had eaten before. "Come," said Ajib, "sit down by me and eat with us." Buddir ad-Din sat down and attempted to embrace Ajib, as a testimony of the joy he conceived upon sitting by him. But Ajib pushed him away, desiring him not to be too familiar. Buddir ad-Din obeyed, and repeated some extempore verses in praise of Ajib. He did not eat, but made it his business to serve his guests. When they had done, he brought them water to wash, and a very white napkin to wipe their hands. Then he filled a large china cup with sherbet, and put snow into it, and offering it to Ajib, "This," said he, "is sherbet of roses, and I am sure you never tasted better." Ajib having drunk of it with pleasure, Buddir ad-Din took the cup from him and presented it to the eunuch, who drank it all off at once. In fine, Ajib and his governor, having fared well, returned thanks to the pastry cook for their good entertainment, and moved homewards, it being then late. When they arrived at the tents of Shumse ad-Din Mahmud, Ajib's grandmother received him with transports of joy. Her son ran always in her mind, and in embracing Ajib, the remembrance of him drew tears from her eyes. "Ah, my child," said she, "my joy would be perfect if I had the pleasure of embracing your father as I now embrace you." She made Ajib sit by her, and put several questions to him, relating to the walk he had been taking with the eunuch, and when he complained of being hungry, she gave him a piece of cream tart, which she had made for herself, and was indeed very good. She likewise gave some to the eunuch. Ajib no sooner touched the piece of cream tart that had been set before him, than he pretended he did not like it, and left it uncut. And Shubani, which was the eunuch's name, did the same. The widow of Nur ad-Din Ali observed with regret that her grandson did not like the tart. "What," said she, "does my child thus despise the work of my hands? Be it known to you, no one in the world can make such besides myself and your father, whom I taught." "My good mother," replied Ajib, "give me leave to tell you, if you do not know how to make better, there is a pastry cook in this town that outdoes you. We were at his shop, and ate of one much better than yours." On hearing this, the grandmother, frowning upon the eunuch, said, "How now, Shubani, was the care of my grandchild committed to you, to carry him to eat at pastry shops like a beggar?" "Madam," replied the eunuch, "it is true we did stop a little while and talked with the pastry cook, but we did not eat with him." Pardon me, said Ajib, we went into his shop, and there ate a cream tart. Upon this the lady, more incensed against the eunuch than before, rose in a passion from the table, and running to the tent of Shumsi ad-Din, informed him of the eunuch's crime, and that in such terms as tended more to inflame the vizier than to dispose him to excuse it. The vizier, who was naturally passionate, did not fail on this occasion to display his anger. He went forthwith to his sister-in-law's tent, and said to the eunuch, Wretch, have you the impudence to abuse the trust I repose in you? Shubani, though sufficiently convicted by Ajib's testimony, denied the fact still. But the child persisting in what he had affirmed, Grandfather, said he, I can assure you we not only ate, but that so very heartily that we have no occasion for supper. Besides, the pastry cook treated us also with a great bowl of sherbet. Well, cried Shumsi ad-Din, after all this, will you continue to deny that you entered the pastry cook's house and ate there? Shubani had still the impudence to swear it was not true. Then you are a liar, said the vizier. I believe my grandchild. But after all, if you can eat up this cream tart, I shall be persuaded you have truth on your side. Though Shubani had crammed himself up to the throat before, he agreed to stand that test, and accordingly took a piece of tart, but his stomach rising against it, he was obliged to spit it out of his mouth. Yet he still pursued the lie, and pretended he had overeaten himself the day before, and had not recovered his appetite. The vizier, irritated with all the eunuch's frivolous presences, and convinced of his guilt, ordered him to be soundly bastinadoed. In undergoing this punishment, the poor wretch shrieked out aloud, and at last confessed the truth. I own, cried he, that we did eat a cream tart at the pastry cook's, and that it was much better than that upon the table. The widow of Nur ad-Din thought it was out of spite to her, and with a desire to mortify her, that Shubani commended the pastry cook's tart, and accordingly said, I cannot believe the cook's tarts are better than mine. I am resolved to satisfy myself upon that head. Where does he live? Go immediately and buy me one of his tarts. The eunuch repaired to Budr ad-Din's shop, and said, Let me have one of your cream tarts. One of our ladies wants to taste them. Budr ad-Din chose one of the best, and gave it to the eunuch. Shubani returned speedily to the tents, gave the tart to Nur ad-Din's widow, who, snatching it greedily, broke a piece off, but no sooner put it to her mouth than she cried out and swooned away. The vizier was extremely surprised at the accident. He threw water upon her face, and was very active in recovering her. As soon as she came to herself, My God, cried she, it must needs be my son, my dear Budr ad-Din, who made this tart. When the vizier Shumsi ad-Din heard his sister-in-law say that the maker of the tart brought by the eunuch must needs be her son, he was overjoyed, but reflecting that his joy might prove groundless, and the conjecture of Nur ad-Din's widow be false. Madam, said he, do you think there may not be a pastry cook in the world who knows how to make cream tarts as well as your son? I own, replied she, there may be pastry cooks that can make as good tarts as he, but as I make them in a peculiar manner, and only my son was let into the secret, it must absolutely be he that made this. Come, my brother, added she in a transport, let us call up mirth and joy. We have at last found what we have been so long looking for. Madam, said the vizier, answer, I entreat you to moderate your impatience, for we shall quickly know the truth. All we have to do is to bring the pastry cook hither, and then you and my daughter will readily distinguish whether he be your son or not. But you must both be concealed so as to have a view of Budr ad-Din while he cannot see you, for I would not have our interview and mutual discovery happen at Damascus. My design is to delay the discovery till we return to Cairo. This said, he left the ladies in their tent, and retired to his own, where he called for 50 of his men, and said to them, Take each of you a stick in your hands and follow Shubani, who will conduct you to a pastry cook in this city. When you arrive there, break and dash in pieces all you find in the shop. If he demand the reason of your outrage, only ask him in return if it was not he that made the cream tart that was brought from his house. If he answer in the affirmative, seize his person, fetter him, and bring him along with you. But take care you do not beat him, nor do him the least harm. Go, and lose no time. The vizier's orders were immediately executed. The detachment, conducted by the black eunuch, went with expedition to Budr ad-Din's house, broke in pieces the plates, kettles, copper pans, and all the other movables and utensils they met with, and inundated the sherbet shop with cream and comfits. Budr ad-Din, astonished at the sight, said with a pitiful tone, "Pray, good people, why do you serve me so? What is the matter? What have I done?" "Was it not you," said they, "that sold this eunuch the cream tart?" "Yes," replied he, "I am the man, and who says anything against it? I defy anyone to make a better." Instead of giving him an answer, they continued to break all around them, and the oven itself was not spared. In the meantime, the neighbors took the alarm, and surprised to see 50 armed men committing such a disorder, asked the reason of such violence, and Budr ad-Din said once more to the rioters, "Pray tell me, what crime have I committed to deserve this usage?" "Was it not you," replied they, "that made the cream tart you sold to the eunuch?" Yes, it was I," replied he. "I maintain it is a good one. I do not deserve this treatment." However, without listening to him, they seized his person, and snatching the cloth off his turban, tied his hands with it behind his back, and, after dragging him by force out of his shop, marched off. The mob, gathering from compassion to Budr ad-Din, took his part. But officers from the governor of the city dispersed the people, and favoured the carrying off of Budr ad-Din, for Shumse ad-Din Mahmud had in the meantime gone to the governor's house to acquaint him with the order he had given, and to demand the interposition of force to favour the execution. And the governor, who commanded all Syria in the name of the Sultan of Egypt, was unwilling to refuse anything to his master's vizier. It was in vain for Budr ad-Din to ask those who carried him off what fault had been found with his cream tart. They gave him no answer. In short, they conducted him to the tents, and made him wait there till Shumse ad-Din returned from the governor of Damascus. Upon the vizier's return, the pretended culprit was brought before him. "My lord," said Budr ad-Din with tears in his eyes, "pray do me the favour to let me know wherein I have displeased you." "Why, you wretch," exclaimed the vizier, "was it not you that made the cream tart you sent me?" "I own I am the man," replied Budr ad-Din. "But pray, what crime is that?" "I will punish you according to your deserts," said Shumse ad-Din. "It will cost you your life for sending me such a sorry tart." "Ah," exclaimed Budr ad-Din, "is it a capital crime to make a bad cream tart?" "Yes," said the vizier, "and you are to expect no other usage from me." While this interview lasted, the ladies, who were concealed behind curtains, saw Budr ad-Din, and recognized him, notwithstanding he had been so long absent. They were so transported with joy that they swooned away, and when they recovered, would fain have run up and fallen upon his neck, but the promise they had made to the vizier of not discovering themselves restrained the tender emotions of love and of nature. Shumse ad-Din, having resolved to set out that night, ordered the tents to be struck, and the necessary preparations to be made for his journey. He ordered Budr ad-Din to be secured in a sort of a cage, and laid on a camel. The vizier and his retinue began their march, and travelled the rest of that night, and all the next day, without stopping. In the evening they halted and Buddir ad-Deen was taken out of his cage in order to be served with the necessary refreshments, but still carefully kept at a distance from his mother and his wife, and during the whole expedition, which lasted 20 days, was served in the same manner. When they arrived at Cairo, they encamped in the neighborhood of the city. Shumsi ad-Deen called for Buddir ad-Deen and gave orders in his presence to prepare a stake. "Alas," said Buddir ad-Deen, "what do you mean to do with a stake?" "Why, to impale you," replied Shumsi ad-Deen, "and then to have you carried through all the quarters of the town, that the people may have the spectacle of a worthless pastry cook who makes cream tarts without pepper." This said, Buddir ad-Deen cried out so ludicrously that Shumsi ad-Deen could hardly keep his countenance. "Alas," said he, "must I suffer a death as cruel as it is ignominious, for not putting pepper in a cream tart?" "How," said Buddir ad-Deen, "must I be rifled? Must I be imprisoned in his chest and at last impaled? And all for not putting pepper in a cream tart? Are these the actions of Mussulmans, of persons who make a profession of probity, justice, and good works?" With these words he shed tears, and then renewing his complaint, "No," continued he, "never was a man used so unjustly, nor so severely. Is it possible they should be capable of taking a man's life for not putting pepper in a cream tart? Cursed be all cream tarts, as well as the hour in which I was born. Would to God I had died that minute." The disconsolate Buddir ad-Deen did not cease his lamentations, and when the stake was brought, cried out bitterly at the horrid sight. "Heaven," said he, "can you suffer me to die an ignominious and painful death? And all this for what crime? Not for robbery or murder or renouncing my religion, but for not putting pepper in a cream tart." Night being then pretty far advanced, the vizier ordered Buddir ad-Deen to be conveyed again to his cage, saying to him, "Stay there till tomorrow. The day shall not elapse before I give orders for your death." The chest or cage then was carried away and laid upon the camel that had brought it from Damascus. At the same time all the other camels were loaded again, and the vizier, mounting his horse, ordered the camel that carried his nephew to march before him, and entered the city with all his suite. After passing through several streets where no one appeared, he arrived at his palace, where he ordered the chest to be taken down, but not opened till further orders. While his retinue were unlading the other camels, he took Buddir ad-Deen's mother and his daughter aside, and addressed himself to the latter. "God be praised," said he, "my child, for this happy occasion of meeting your cousin and your husband. You remember, of course, what order your chamber was in on your wedding night. Go and put all things as they were then placed, and if your memory do not serve you, I can aid it by a written account, which I caused to be taken upon that occasion." The beautiful lady went joyfully to execute her father's orders, and he at the same time commanded the hall to be adorned as when Buddir ad-Deen Husn was there with the Sultan of Egypt's hunchbacked groom. As he went over his manuscript, his domestics placed every movable in the described order. The throne was not forgotten, nor the lighted wax candles. When everything was arranged in the hall, the vizier went into his daughter's chamber and put in their due place Buddir ad-Deen's apparel with a purse of sequins. This done, he said to the beautiful lady, "Undress yourself, my child, and go to bed. As soon as Buddir ad-Deen enters your room, complain of his being from you so long, and tell him that when you awoke you were astonished you did not find him by you. Press him to come to bed again, and tomorrow morning you will divert your mother-in-law and me by giving us an account of your interview." This said, he went from his daughter's apartment, and left her to undress herself and go to bed. Shumse ad-Din Mahmud ordered all his domestics to depart the hall, excepting 2 or 3 whom he desired to remain. These he commanded to go and take Buddir ad-Deen out of the cage, to strip him to his undervest and drawers, to conduct him in that condition to the hall, to leave him there alone, and shut the door upon him. Buddir ad-Deen, though overwhelmed with grief, was asleep so soundly that the vizier's domestics had taken him out of the chest and stripped him before he awoke, and they carried him so suddenly into the hall that they did not give him time to see where he was. When he found himself alone in the hall, he looked round him, and the objects he beheld recalling to his memory the circumstances of his marrying, he perceived with astonishment that it was the place where he had seen the Sultan's groom of the stables. His surprise was still the greater when, approaching softly the door of a chamber which he found open, he spied his own raiments where he remembered to have left them on his wedding night. "My God," said he, rubbing his eyes, "am I asleep or awake?" The beautiful lady, who in the meantime was diverting herself with his astonishment, opened the curtains of her bed suddenly, and bending her head forward, "My dear lord," said she with a soft, tender air, "what do you do at the door? You have been out of bed a long time. I was strangely surprised when I awoke in not finding you by me." Buddir ad-Deen was enraptured. He entered the room, but reverting to all that had passed during a 10 years interval, and not being able to persuade himself that it could all have happened in the compass of one night, he went to the place where his vestments lay with a purse of sequins, and after examining them very carefully, exclaimed, "By Allah, these are mysteries which I can by no means comprehend." The lady, who was pleased to see his confusion, said once more, "My lord, what do you wait for?" He stepped towards the bed and said to her, "Is it long since I left you?" "The question," answered she, "surprises me. Did not you rise from me but now? Surely your mind is deranged." "Madam," replied Buddir ad-Deen, "I do assure you my thoughts are not very composed. I remember indeed to have been with you, but I remember at the same time that I have since lived 10 years at Damascus. Now, if I was actually in bed with you this night, I cannot have been from you so long. These 2 points are inconsistent. Pray tell me what I am to think, whether my marriage with you is an illusion, or whether my absence from you is only a dream." "Yes, my lord," cried she, "doubtless you were light-headed when you thought you were at Damascus." Upon this Buddir ad-Deen laughed heartily and said, "What a comical fancy is this! I assure you, madam, this dream of mine will be very pleasant to you. Do but imagine, if you please, that I was at the gate of Damascus in my shirt and drawers, as I am here now, that I entered the town with the halo of a mob who followed and insulted me, that I fled to a pastry cook who adopted me, taught me his trade, and left me all he had when he died, that after his death I kept a shop. In fine, I had an infinity of other adventures too tedious to recount, and all I can say is that it was well that I awoke, for they were going to impale me." "And for what?" cried the lady, feigning astonishment. "Would they have used you so cruelly? Surely you must have committed some enormous crime." "Not the least," replied Buddir ad-Deen. "It was for nothing but a mere trifle, the most ridiculous thing you can imagine. All the crime I was charged with was selling a cream tart that had no pepper in it." "As for that matter," said the beautiful lady, laughing heartily, "I must say they did you great injustice." "Ah," replied he, "that was not all. For this cursed cream tart was everything in my shop broken to pieces, myself bound and fettered, and flung into a chest, where I lay so close that methinks I am there still. But thanks be to God, all was a dream." Buddir ad-Deen was not easy all night. He awoke from time to time, and put the question to himself whether he dreamt or was awake. He distrusted his felicity, and, to be sure whether it was true or not, looked round the room. "I am not mistaken," said he. "This is the same chamber where I entered instead of the hunchbacked groom of the stables, and I am now in bed with the fair lady designed for him." Daylight, which then appeared, had not yet dispelled his uneasiness when the vizier Shumsi ad-Din, his uncle, knocked at the door and at the same time went in to bid him good morrow. Buddir ad-Din was extremely surprised to see a man he knew so well, and who now appeared with a different air from that which he pronounced the terrible sentence of death against him. "Ah," cried Buddir ad-Din, "it was you who condemned me so unjustly to a kind of death, the thoughts of which make me shudder, and all for a cream tart without pepper." The vizier fell a laughing, and to put him out of suspense, told him how by the ministry of a genie, for Hunchback's relation made him suspect the adventure, he had been at his palace, and had married his daughter instead of the sultan's groom of the stables. Then he acquainted him that he had discovered him to be his nephew by the memorandum of his father, and pursuant to that discovery had gone from Cairo to Bussorah in quest of him. "My dear nephew," added he, embracing him with every expression of tenderness, "I ask your pardon for all I have made you undergo since I discovered you. I resolved to bring you to my palace before I told you your happiness, which ought now to be so much the dearer to you as it has cost you so much perplexity and distress. To atone for all your afflictions, comfort yourself with the joy of being in the company of those who ought to be dearest to you. While you are dressing yourself, I will go and acquaint your mother, who is beyond measure impatient to see you, and will likewise bring to you your son, whom you saw at Damascus, and for whom, without knowing him, you showed so much affection." No words can adequately express the joy of Buddir ad-Din when he saw his mother and his son. They embraced and showed all the transports that love and tenderness could inspire. The mother spoke to Buddir ad-Din in the most moving terms. She mentioned the grief she had felt for his long absence, and the tears she had shed. Little Ajib, instead of flying his father's embraces, as at Damascus, received them with all the marks of pleasure. And Buddir ad-Din Husn, divided between two objects so worthy of his love, thought he could not give sufficient testimonies of his affection. While this passed, the vizier was gone to the palace to give the sultan an account of the happy success of his travels, and the sultan was so moved with the recital of the story that he ordered it to be taken down in writing and carefully preserved among the archives of the kingdom. After Shumsi ad-Din's return to his palace, he sat down with his family, and all the household passed the day in festivity and mirth. The vizier Jafir, having thus concluded the story of Buddir ad-Din, told the caliph that this was what he had to relate to his majesty. The caliph found the story so surprising that without further hesitation he granted his slave Rian's pardon, and to console the young man for the grief of having unhappily deprived himself of a woman whom he had loved so tenderly, married him to one of his slaves, bestowed liberal gifts upon him, and maintained him till he died. End of section 31 of the Arabian Nights Entertainments, Volume 1, by Anonymous, translated by Dr. Jonathan Scott. Read by Lars Rolander.
Section 32 of the Arabian Nights Entertainments, Volume 1. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by John Scott Jones. The Arabian Nights Entertainments, Volume 1, by Anonymous. Translated by Dr. Jonathan Scott. Section 32. The history of Ghanem, son of Abu Ayyub, and known by the surname of Love's Slave. There was formerly at Damascus a merchant, who had by care and industry acquired great wealth, on which he lived in a very honorable manner. His name was Abu Ayyub, and he had one son and a daughter. The son was called Ghanem, but afterwards surnamed Love's Slave. His person was graceful, and the excellent qualities of his mind had been improved by able masters. The daughter's name was Al-Kolam, signifying ravisher of hearts, because her beauty was so perfect that whoever saw her could not avoid loving her. Abu Ayyub died and left immense riches. 100 loads of brocades and other silks that lay in his warehouse were the least part. The loads were ready made up, and on every bale was written in large characters, "For Baghdad." Muhammad, the son of Solomon, surnamed Zinebi, reigned at that time in Damascus, the capital of Syria. His kinsman, Harun al-Rashid, had bestowed that kingdom on him as his tributary. Soon after the death of Abu Ayyub, Ghanem conversed with his mother about their domestic affairs, and concerning the loads of merchandise in the warehouse, asked her the meaning of what was written upon each bale. "My son," answered his mother, "your father used to travel sometimes into one province and sometimes into another, and it was customary with him, before he set out, to write the name of the city he designed to repair to on every bale. He had provided all things to take a journey to Baghdad, and was on the point of setting out, when death—" She had not the power to finish. The lively remembrance of the loss of her husband would not permit her to say more, and drew from her a shower of tears. Ghanem could not see his mother so sensibly affected, without being equally so himself. They continued some time silent, but at length he recovered himself, and as soon as he found his mother calm enough to listen to him, said, "Since my father designed these goods for Baghdad, I will prepare myself to perform that journey, and I think it will be proper for me to hasten my departure, for fear those commodities should perish, or that we should lose the opportunity of selling them to the best advantage." Abu Ayyub's widow, who tenderly loved her son, was much concerned at this resolution, and replied, "My dear child, I cannot but commend you for designing to follow your father's example. But consider that you are too young, inexperienced, and unaccustomed to the fatigue of traveling. Besides, can you think of leaving me, and adding to that sorrow with which I am already oppressed? Is it not better to sell those goods to the merchants of Damascus, and take up with a moderate profit, than expose yourself to the danger of perishing?" It was in vain for her to oppose Ghanem's resolution by the strongest arguments. They had no weight with him. An inclination to travel, and to accomplish himself by a thorough knowledge of the world, urged him to set out, and prevailed over all his mother's remonstrances, her entreaties, and even her tears. He went to the market, where slaves were sold, and bought such as were able-bodied, hired 100 camels, and having provided all other necessaries, entered upon his journey with 5 or 6 merchants of Damascus, who were going to trade at Baghdad. Those merchants, attended by their slaves and accompanied by several other travelers, made up such a considerable caravan that they had nothing to fear from the Bedouin Arabs, who made it their only profession to range the country, and attack and plunder the caravans when they are not strong enough to repulse them. They had no other difficulty to encounter than the usual fatigues of a long journey, which were easily forgotten when they came in sight of the city of Baghdad, where they arrived in safety. They alighted at the most magnificent and most frequented khan in the city, but Ghanem chose to be lodged conveniently and by himself. He only left his goods there in a warehouse for their greater security, and hired a spacious house in the neighborhood, richly furnished, having a garden which was very delightful on account of its many waterworks and shady groves. Some days after this young merchant had been settled in his house, and perfectly recovered from the fatigue of his journey, he dressed himself richly, and repaired to the public place where the merchants met to transact business. The slave followed him, carrying a parcel of fine stuffs and silks. The merchants received Ghanem very courteously, and their syndic, or chief, to whom he first made application, bought all his parcel at the price set down in the ticket annexed to every piece of stuff. Ghanem continued his trade so successfully that he every day sold all the goods he exposed. He had but 1 bale left, which he had caused to be carried from the warehouse to his own house. He then went to the public rendezvous, where he found all the shops shut. This seemed somewhat extraordinary to him, and having asked the cause, he was told that one of the first merchants, whom he knew, was dead, and that all his brother traders were gone to his funeral. Ghanem inquired for the mosque where prayer was to be said, and whence the body was to be conducted to the grave, and having been informed, sent back his slave with the goods, and walked towards the mosque. He got thither before the prayers were ended, which were said in a hall hung with black satin. The corpse was taken up, and followed by the kindred, the merchants, and Ghanem, to the place of burial, which was at some distance without the city. It was a stone structure, in form of a dome, purposely built to receive the bodies of all the family of the deceased, and being very small, they had pitched tents around, that all the company might be sheltered during the ceremony. The monument was opened, and the corpse laid in it, after which it was shut up. Then the imam and other ministers of the mosque sat down in a ring on carpets in the largest tent, and recited the rest of the prayers. They also read the Fatiha, or introductory chapter of the Quran, appointed for the burial of the dead. The kindred and merchants sat round, in the same manner, behind the ministers. It was near night before all was ended. Ghanem, who had not expected such a long ceremony, began to be uneasy, and the more so when he saw meat served up, in memory of the deceased, according to the custom of the Mohammedans. He was also told that the tents had been set up not only against the heat of the sun, but also against the evening dew, because they should not return to the city before the next morning. These words perplexed Ghanem. "I am a stranger," said he to himself, "and have the reputation of being a rich merchant. Thieves may take the opportunity of my absence and rob my house. My slaves may be tempted by so favorable an opportunity. They may run away with all the gold I have received for my goods, and whither shall I go to look for them?" Full of these thoughts, he ate a few mouthfuls hastily, and slipped away from the company. He made all possible haste, but, as it often happens that the more a man hurries, the less he advances, he went astray in the dark, so that it was near midnight when he came to the city gate, which, to add to his misfortune, was shut. This was a fresh affliction to him, and he was obliged to look for some convenient place in which to pass the rest of the night, till the gate was opened. He went into a burial place, so spacious that it had reached from the city to the very place he had left. He advanced to some high walls, which enclosed a small field, being the mausoleum of a family, and in which there was a palm tree. Ghanem, finding that the burial place where the palm tree grew was open, went into it and shut the door after him. He lay down on the grass and tried to sleep, but his uneasiness at being absent from home would not permit him. He got up, and after having passed before the door several times, opened it, without knowing why, and immediately perceived at a distance a light, which seemed to come towards him. He was startled at the sight, closed the door, which had nothing to secure it but a latch, and got up as fast as he could to the top of the palm tree, looking upon that as the safest retreat under his present apprehensions. No sooner was he up, than by the help of the light which had alarmed him, he plainly perceived 3 men, whom, by their habit, he knew to be slaves, enter into the burial place. One of them advanced with a lantern, and the 2 others followed him, loaded with a chest, between 5 and 6 feet long, which they carried on their shoulders. They set it down, and then one of the 3 slaves said to his comrades, "Brethren, if you will be advised by me, we will leave the chest here, and return to the city." "No, no," replied another, "that would not be executing our mistress's orders. We may have cause to repent not doing as we were commanded. Let us bury the chest, since we are enjoined so to do." The 2 other slaves complied. They began to break ground with the tools they had brought for that purpose. When they had made a deep trench, they put the chest into it, and covered it with the earth they had taken out, and then departed. Ghanem, who from the top of the palm tree had heard every word the slaves had spoken, could not tell what to think of the adventure. He concluded that the chest must contain something of value, and that the person to whom it belonged had some particular reason for causing it to be buried in the cemetery. He resolved immediately to satisfy his curiosity, came down from the palm tree, the departure of the slaves having dissipated his fear, and fell to work upon the pit, plying his hands and feet so well that in a short time he uncovered the chest, but found it secured by a padlock. This new obstacle to the satisfying of his curiosity was no small mortification to him, yet he was not discouraged, but, the day beginning then to appear, he saw several great stones about the burial place. He picked out one, with which he easily knocked off the padlock, and then, with much impatience, opened the chest. Ganem was strangely surprised when, instead of money, he discovered a young lady of incomparable beauty. Her fresh and rosy complexion and her gentle, regular breathing satisfied him that she was alive, but he could not conceive why, if she were only asleep, that she had not awaked at the noise he made in forcing off the padlock. Her habit was so costly, with bracelets and pendants of diamonds, and a necklace of pearls so large, that he had not the least doubt of her being one of the principal ladies of the court. At the sight of so beautiful an object, not only compassion and natural inclination to relieve persons in danger, but something more powerful, which Ganem could not then account for, prevailed on him to afford the unfortunate beauty all the assistance in his power. He first shut the gate of the burial place, which the slaves had left open. Then, returning, took the lady in his arms, and laid her on the soft earth which he had thrown off the chest. As soon as she was exposed to the air, she sneezed, and, by the motion in turning her head, there came from her mouth a liquor, with which her stomach seemed to have been loaded. Then, opening and rubbing her eyes, she, with such a voice as charmed Ganem, whom she did not see, cried out, "Zohar Boston, Sheher al-Miryan, Kasabo Sukar, Nurin Nihar, Nagmato Sohi, Nansbeto Zaman, why do you not answer? Where are you?" These were the names of 6 female slaves that used to wait on her. She called them, and wondered that nobody answered, but at length, looking about, and perceiving she was in a burial place, was seized with fear. "What?" cried she, much louder than before. "Are the dead raised? Is the day of judgment come? What a wonderful change is this from evening to morning!"
Ganem did not think fit to leave the lady any longer in her perplexity, but presented himself before her with all possible respect, and in the most courteous manner. "Madam," said he, "I am not able to express my joy of having happened to be here to do you the service I have, and to offer you all the assistance you may need under your present circumstances. In order to persuade the lady to repose confidence in him, he, in the first place, told her who he was, and what accident had brought him to that place. Next, he acquainted her with the coming of the 3 slaves, and how they had buried the chest. The lady, who had covered her face with her veil as soon as Ganem appeared, was extremely sensible of the obligations she owed him. "I return thanks to God," said she, "for having sent so worthy a person as you as to deliver me from death. But since you have begun so charitable a work, I conjure you not to leave it imperfect. Let me beg of you to go into the city, and provide a muleteer to come with his mule, and carry me to your house in this chest. For, should I go with you on foot, my dress being different from that of the city ladies, someone might take notice of it, and follow me, which it highly concerns me to prevent. When I shall be in your house, I will give you an account of myself, and in the meantime be assured that you have not obliged an ungrateful person."
Before the young merchant left the lady, he drew the chest out of the pit, which he filled up with earth, laid her again in the chest, and shut it in such a manner that it did not look as if the padlock had been forced off. But for fear of stifling her, he did not put it quite close, leaving room for the admittance of air. Going out of the burial place, he drew the door after him, and the city gate being then open, soon found what he sought. He returned with speed to the burial place, and helped the muleteer to lay the chest across his mule, telling him to remove all cause of suspicion, that he came to that place the night before with another muleteer, who, being in haste to return home, had laid down the chest where he saw it. Ganem, who who since his arrival at Baghdad had minded nothing but business, was still unacquainted with the power of love, and now felt its first attacks. It had not been in his power to look upon the young lady without being dazzled, and the uneasiness he felt at following the muleteer at a distance, and the fear lest any accident might happen by the way that should deprive him of his conquest, taught him to unravel his thoughts. He was more than usually delighted when, being arrived safe at home, he saw the chest unloaded. He dismissed the muleteer, and having caused a slave to shut the door of his house, opened the chest, helped the lady out, gave her his hand, and conducted her to his apartment, lamenting how much she must have endured in such close confinement. "If I have suffered," said she, "I have satisfaction sufficient in what you have done for me, and in the pleasure of seeing myself out of danger." Though Ghanem's apartment was very richly furnished, the lady did not so much regard its appearance as she did the handsome presence and engaging mien of her deliverer, whose politeness and obliging behavior heightened her gratitude. She sat down on a sofa, and to give the merchant to understand how sensible she was of the service done her, took off her veil. Ghanem, on his part, was sensible of the favor so lovely a lady did in uncovering her face to him, or rather felt he had already a most violent passion for her. Whatever obligations she owed him, he thought himself more than requited by so singular a favor. The lady dived into Ghanem's thoughts, yet was not at all alarmed, because he appeared very respectful. He, judging she might have occasion to eat, and not willing to trust any but himself with the care of entertaining so charming a guest, went out with a slave to an eating-house to give directions for an entertainment. From thence he went to a fruiterer, where he chose the finest and best fruit, buying also the choicest wine, and the same bread that was eaten at the Caliph's table. As soon as he returned home, he, with his own hands, made a pyramid of the fruit he had bought, and serving it up himself to the lady in a large dish of the finest chinaware. "Madam," said he, "be pleased to make choice of some of this fruit, while a more solid entertainment, and more worthy yourself, is preparing." He would have continued standing before her, but she declared she would not touch anything unless he sat down and ate with her. He obeyed, and when they had eaten a little, Ghanem, observing that the lady's veil, which she laid down by her on a sofa, was embroidered along the edge with golden letters, begged her permission to look at the embroidery. The lady immediately took up the veil and delivered it to him, asking him whether he could read. "Madam," replied he with a modest air, "a merchant would be ill qualified to manage his business if he could not at least read and write." "Well then," said she, "read the words which are embroidered on that veil, which gives me an opportunity of telling you my story." Ghanem took the veil, and read these words: "I am yours, and you are mine, thou descendant from the Prophet's uncle." That descendant from the Prophet's uncle was the Caliph, Harun al-Rashid, who then reigned, and was descended from Abbas, Muhammad's uncle. When Ghanem perceived these words, "Alas, madam," said he, in a melancholy tone, "I have just saved your life, and this writing is my death. I do not comprehend all the mystery, but it convinces me that I am the most unfortunate of men. Pardon, madam, the liberty I take, but it was impossible for me to see you without giving you my heart. You are not ignorant yourself that it was not in my power to refuse it you, and that makes my presumption excusable. I propose to myself to touch your heart by my respectful behavior, my care, my assiduity, my submission, my constancy, and no sooner have I formed the flattering design than I am robbed of all my hopes. I cannot long survive so great a misfortune, but, be that as it will, I shall have the satisfaction of dying entirely yours. Proceed, madam, I conjure you, and give me full information of my unhappy fate." He could not utter those words without letting fall some tears. The lady was moved, but was so far from being displeased at the declaration he made that she felt a secret joy, for her heart began to yield. However, she concealed her feelings, and as if she had not regarded what Ghanem had said. "I should have been very cautious," answered she. of strewing you my veil, had I thought it would have given you so much uneasiness. But I do not perceive that what I have to say to you can make your condition so deplorable as you imagine. You must understand, proceeded she, that in order to acquaint you with my story, that my name is Fetnah, which signifies disturbance, which was given me at my birth, because it was judged that the sight of me would one day occasion many calamities. Of this you cannot be ignorant, since there is nobody in Baghdad but knows that the Caliph, my sovereign lord and yours, has a favorite so called. I was carried into his palace in my tenderest years, and I have been brought up with all the care that is usually taken with such persons of my sex as are destined to reside there. I made no little progress in all they took the pains to teach me, and that, with some share of beauty, gained me the affection of the Caliph, who allotted me a particular apartment adjoining to his own. That prince was not satisfied with such a mark of distinction. He appointed 20 women to wait on me, and as many eunuchs. And ever since, he has made me such considerable presents that I saw myself richer than any queen in the world. You may judge by what I have said, that Zubaydah, the Caliph's wife and kinswoman, could not but be jealous of my happiness. Though Haroun has all the regard imaginable for her, she has taken every possible opportunity to ruin me. Hitherto, I had secured myself against all her snares, but at length I fell under the last effort of her jealousy, and, had it not been for you, must now have been exposed to inevitable death. I question not, but she had corrupted one of my slaves, who last night, in some lemonade, gave me a drug, which causes such a dead sleep that it is easy to dispose of those who have taken it, for that sleep is so profound that nothing can dispel it for the space of 7 or 8 hours. I have the more reason to judge so, because naturally I am a very bad sleeper, and apt to wake at the least noise. Zubaydah, the better to put her design in execution, has availed herself of the absence of the Caliph, who went lately to put himself at the head of his troops, to chastise some neighboring kings, who have formed a league of rebellion. Were it not for this opportunity, my rival, outrageous as she is, durst not have presumed to attempt anything against my life. I know not what she will do to conceal this action from the Caliph, but you see it highly concerns me that you should keep my secret. My life depends on it. I shall be safe in your house as long as the Caliph is from Baghdad. It concerns you to keep my adventure private, for should Zubaydah know the obligation I owe you, she would punish you for having saved me. When the Caliph returns, I shall not need to be so much upon my guard. I shall find means to acquaint him with all that has happened, and I am fully persuaded he will be more earnest than myself to requite a service which restores me to his love. As soon as Haroun al-Rashid's beautiful favorite had done speaking, Ghanem said, "Madam, I return you 1,000 thanks for having given me the information I took the liberty to desire of you, and I beg of you to believe that you are here in safety. The sentiments you have inspired are a pledge of my secrecy. As for my slaves, they may perhaps fail of the fidelity they owe me, should they know by what accident and in what place I had the happiness to find you. I dare assure you, however, that they will not have the curiosity to inquire. It is so natural for young men to purchase beautiful slaves, that it will be no way surprising to them to see you here, believing you to be one, and that I have bought you. They will also conclude that I have some particular reason for bringing you home, as they saw I did. Set your heart, therefore, at rest as to that point, and remain satisfied that you shall be served with all the respect that is due to the favorite of so great a monarch as our sovereign, the Caliph. But great as he is, give me leave, madam, to declare that nothing can make me recall the present I have made you of my heart. I know, and shall never forget, that what belongs to the master is forbidden to the slave. But I loved you before you told me that you were engaged to the Caliph. It is not in my power to overcome a passion which, though now in its infancy, has all the force of a love strengthened by a perfect situation. I wish your august and most fortunate lover may avenge you of the malice of Zubaydah, by calling you back to him, and when you shall be restored to his wishes, that you may remember the unfortunate Ghanem, who is no less your conquest than the Caliph. Powerful as that prince is, I flatter myself that he will not be able to blot me out of your remembrance. He cannot love you more passionately than I do, and I shall never cease to love you, into whatever part of the world I may go to expire, after having lost you." Fetnah perceived that Ghanem was under the greatest of afflictions, and his situation affected her. But considering the uneasiness she was likely to bring upon herself by prosecuting the conversation on that subject, which might insensibly lead her to discover the inclination she felt for him, "I perceive," said she, "that this conversation gives you too much uneasiness. Let us change the subject, and talk about the infinite obligation I owe you. I can never sufficiently express my gratitude when I reflect that without your assistance I should never again have beheld the light of the sun." It was happy for them both that somebody just then knocked at the door. Ghanem went to see who it was, and found it to be one of his slaves come to acquaint him that the entertainment was ready. Ghanem, who by way of precaution would have none of his slaves come into the room where Fetnah was, took what was brought, and served it up himself to his beautiful guest, whose soul was ravished to behold what attention he paid her. When they had eaten, Ghanem took away, as he had covered the table, and having delivered all things at the door of the apartment to his slaves, "Madam," said he to Fetnah, "you may now perhaps desire to take some rest. I will leave you, and when you have reposed yourself, you shall find me ready to receive your commands." Having thus spoken, he left her, and went to purchase 2 women slaves. He also bought 2 parcels, one of fine linen, and the other of all such things as were proper to make up a toilet, fit for the Caliph's favorite. Having conducted home the 2 women slaves, he presented them to Fetnah, saying, "Madam, a person of your quality cannot be without 2 waiting maids at least to serve you. Be pleased to accept of these." Fetnah, admiring Ghanem's attention, said, "My lord, I perceive you are not one that will do things by halves. You add by your courtesy to the obligations I owe you already. But I hope I shall not die ungrateful, and that heaven will soon place me in a condition to requite all your acts of generosity." When the women slaves were withdrawn into a chamber adjoining, he sat down on the sofa, but at some distance from Fetnah, in token of respect. He then began to discourse of his passion. "I dare not so much as hope," said he, "to excite the least sensibility in a heart like yours, destined for the greatest prince in the world. Alas, it would be a comfort to me in my misfortune, if I could but flatter myself that you have not looked upon the excess of my love with indifference." "My lord," answered Fetnah. "Alas, madam," said Ghanem, interrupting her at the word lord, "this is the 2nd time you have done me the honor to call me lord. The presence of the women slaves hindered me the first time from taking notice of it to you. In the name of God, madam, do not give me this title of honor. It does not belong to me. Treat me, I beseech you, as your slave. I am, and shall never cease to be so." "No, no," replied Fetnah, interrupting him in her turn. "I shall be cautious how I treat with such disrespect a man to whom I owe my life. I should be ungrateful could I say or do anything that did not become you. Leave me, therefore, to follow the dictates of my gratitude, and do not require of me that I should misbehave myself towards you in return for the benefits I have received. I shall never be guilty of such conduct. I am too sensible of your respectful behavior to abuse it, and I will not hesitate to own that I do not regard your care with indifference. You know the reasons that condemn me to silence." Ghanem was enraptured at this declaration. He wept for joy, and not being able to find expression significant enough in his own opinion to return Fetnah thanks, was satisfied with telling her that as she knew what she owed to the Caliph, he, on his part, was not ignorant that what belongs to the master is forbidden to the slave. Night drawing on, he rose up to fetch a light, which he brought in himself, as also a collation. They both sat down at table, and at first complimented each other on the fruit as they presented it reciprocally. The excellence of the wine insensibly drew them both to drink, and having drunk 2 or 3 glasses, they agreed that neither should take another glass without first singing some air. Ghanem sung verses extempore, expressive of the vehemence of his passion, and Fetnah, encouraged by his example, composed and sung verses relating to her adventure, and always containing something which Ghanem might take in a sense favorable to himself. Except in this, she most exactly observed the fidelity due to the Caliph. The collation continued till very late, and the night was far advanced before they thought of parting. Ghanem then withdrew to another apartment, leaving Fetnah where she was, the women slaves he had bought her coming in to wait upon her. They lived together in this manner for several days. The young merchant went not abroad, unless upon the utmost consequence, and even for that took the time when the lady was reposing, for he could not prevail upon himself to lose a moment that might be spent in her company. All his thoughts were taken up with his dear Fetnah, who on her side gave way to her inclination, confessed she had no less affection for him than he had for her. However, fond as they were of each other, their respect for the Caliph kept them within due bounds, which still heightened their passion. Whilst Fetnah, thus snatched from the jaws of death, passed her time so agreeably with Ghanem, Zobeide was not without some apprehensions in the palace of Harun al-Rashid. No sooner had the 3 slaves, entrusted with the execution of her revenge, carried away the chest, without knowing what it contained, or so much as the least curiosity to inquire, being used to pay a blind obedience to her commands, than she was seized with a tormenting uneasiness. 1,000 perplexing thoughts disturbed her rest. Sleep fled from her eyes, and she spent the night in contriving how to conceal her crime. "My consort," said she, "loves Fetnah more than ever he did any of his favorites. What shall I say to him at his return, when he inquires of me after her?" Many contrivances occurred to her, but none were satisfactory. Still she met with difficulties, and knew not where to fix. There lived with her a lady advanced in years, who had bred her up from her infancy. As soon as it was day, she sent for her, and having entrusted her with the secret, said, "My good mother, you have always assisted me with your advice. If ever I stood in need of it, it is now, when the business before you is to still my thoughts, distracted by mortal anxiety, and to show me some way to satisfy the Caliph." "My dear mistress," replied the old lady, "it had been much better not to have run yourself into the difficulties you labor under. But since the thing is done, the best consolation is to think no more of it. All that must now be thought of is how to deceive the commander of the believers, and I am of the opinion that you should immediately cause a wooden image resembling a dead body to be carved. We will shroud it up in linen, and when shut up in a coffin, it shall be buried in some part of the palace. You shall then immediately cause a marble mausoleum to be built in the form of a dome over the burial place, and erect a tomb, which shall be covered with embroidered cloth, and set about with great candlesticks and large wax tapers. There is another thing," added the old lady, "which ought not to be forgotten. You must put on mourning, and cause the same to be done by your own and Fetnah's women, your eunuchs, and all the officers of the palace. When the Caliph returns and sees you all and the palace in mourning, he will not fail to ask the occasion of it. You will then have an opportunity of insinuating yourself into his favor, by saying, it was out of respect to him that you paid the last honors to Fetnah, snatched away by sudden death. You may tell him you have caused a mausoleum to be built, and, in short, that you have paid all the last honors to his favorite, as he would have done himself had he been present. His passion for her being extraordinary, he will certainly go to shed tears upon her grave, and perhaps, added the old woman, he will not believe she is really dead. He may possibly suspect you have turned her out of the palace through jealousy, and look upon all the mourning as artifice to deceive him, and prevent his making inquiries after her. It is likely he will cause the coffin to be taken up and opened, and it is certain he will be convinced of her death as soon as he shall see the figure of a dead body buried. He will be pleased with all you shall have done, and express his gratitude. As for the wooden image, I will myself undertake to have it cut by a carver in the city, who shall not know the purpose for which it is designed. As for your part, madam, order Fetnah's women, who yesterday gave her the lemonade, to give out among her companions that she has just found her mistress dead in her bed, and in order that they may only think of lamenting, without offering to go into her chamber, let her add she has already acquainted you with the circumstance, and that you have ordered Mesrur to cause her to be buried. End of section 32. Recording by John Scott Jones, Milwaukee, Wisconsin, June 24th, 2007. Section 33 of the Arabian Nights Entertainment, Volume 1. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by John Scott Jones. The Arabian Nights Entertainments, Volume 1, by Anonymous. Translated by Dr. Jonathan Scott. Section 33. As soon as the old lady had spoken, Zubaydah took a rich diamond ring out of her casket, and putting it on her finger, and embracing her in a transport of joy, said, "How infinitely am I beholden to you, my good mother! I should never have thought of so ingenious a contrivance. It cannot fail of success, and I begin to recover my peace. I leave the care of the wooden figure to you, and will go myself to order the rest." The wooden image was got ready with as much expedition as Zubaydah could have wished, and then conveyed by the old lady herself into Fetnah's bedchamber, where she dressed it like a dead body, and put it into a coffin. Then Mesrur, who was himself deceived by it, caused the coffin and the representation of Fetnah to be carried away, and buried with the usual ceremonies in the place appointed by Zubaydah, the favourite's women weeping and lamenting, she who had given her the lemonade setting them an example by her cries and lamentations. That very day Zubaydah sent for the architect of the palace, and according to orders the mausoleum was finished in a short time. Such potent princesses as the consort of a monarch whose power extended from east to west are always punctually obeyed in whatsoever they command. She soon put on mourning with all the court, so that the news of Fetnah's death was quickly spread over the city. Ghanem was one of the last who heard of it, for, as I have before observed, he hardly ever went abroad. Being, however, at length informed of it, "Madam," said he to the Caliph's fair favourite, "you are supposed in Baghdad to be dead, and I do not question but that Zubaydah herself believes it. I bless heaven that I am the cause and the happy witness of your being alive. Would to God that, taking advantage of this false report, you would share my fortune, and go far from hence to reign in my heart. But whither does this pleasing transport carry me? I do not consider that you are born to make the greatest prince in the world happy, and that only Harun al-Rashid is worthy of you. Supposing you could resolve to give him up for me, and that you would follow me, ought I to consent? No. It is my part always to remember that what belongs to the master is forbidden to the slave." The lovely Fetnah, though moved by the tenderness of the passion he expressed, yet prevailed with herself not to encourage it. "My lord," said she to him, "we cannot obstruct the momentary triumph of Zubaydah. I am not surprised at the artifice she uses to conceal her guilt, but let her go on. I flatter myself that sorrow will soon follow her triumph. The Caliph will return, and we shall find the means privately to inform him of all that has happened. In the meantime, let us be more cautious than ever, that she may not know that I am alive. I have already told you the consequences to be apprehended from such a discovery." At the end of 3 months, the Caliph returned to Baghdad with glory, having vanquished all his enemies. He entered the palace with impatience to embrace Fetnah, but was amazed to see all the officers in mourning, and his concern was redoubled when, Approaching the apartment of Zubaydah, he beheld that princess coming to meet him in mourning with all her women. He immediately asked her the cause with much agitation. "Commander of the believers," answered Zubaydah, "I am in mourning for your slave Fetnah, who died so suddenly that it was impossible to apply any remedy to her disorder. She would have proceeded, but the Caliph did not give her time, being so agitated at the news that he uttered a feeble exclamation and fainted. On recovering himself, he, with a feeble voice, which sufficiently expressed his extreme grief, asked where his dear Fetnah had been buried. "Sir," said Zubaydah, "I myself took care of her funeral, and spared no cost to make it magnificent. I have caused a marble mausoleum to be built over her grave, and will attend you thither, if you desire." The Caliph would not permit Zubaydah to take that trouble, but contented himself to have Masrur to conduct him. He went thither just as he was, in his camp dress. When he saw the tomb, the wax lights round it, and the magnificence of the mausoleum, he was amazed that Zubaydah should have performed the obsequies of her rival with so much pomp, and being naturally of a jealous temper, suspected his wife's generosity, and fancied his mistress might perhaps be yet alive, that Zubaydah, taking advantage of his long absence, might have turned her out of the palace, ordering those she had entrusted to conduct her, to convey her so far off that she might never more be heard of. This was all he suspected, for he did not think Zubaydah wicked enough to have attempted the life of his favourite. The better to discover the truth himself, he ordered the tomb to be removed, and caused the grave and the coffin to be opened in his presence. But when he saw the linen wrapped round the wooden image, he durst not proceed any further. This devout Caliph thought it would be a sacrilegious act to suffer the body of the dead lady to be touched, and this scrupulous fear prevailed over his love and curiosity. He doubted not of Fetnah's death. He caused the coffin to be shut up again, the grave to be filled, and the tomb to be made as it was before. The Caliph, thinking himself obliged to pay some respect to the grave of his favourite, sent for the ministers of religion, the officers of the palace, and the readers of the Koran, and whilst they were collecting together, he remained in the mausoleum, moistening with his tears the marble that covered the phantom of his mistress. When all the persons he had sent for were come, he stood before the tomb and recited long prayers, after which the readers of the Koran read several chapters. The same ceremony was performed every day for a whole month, morning and evening, the Caliph being always present, with the Grand Vizier and the principal officers of the court, all of them in mourning, as well as the Caliph himself, who all the time ceased not to honour the memory of Fetnah with his tears, and would not hear of any business. The last day of the month, the prayers and reading from the Koran lasted from morning till break of day the next morning. The Caliph, being tired with sitting up so long, went to take some rest in his apartment, and fell asleep upon a sofa, between two of the court ladies, one of them sitting at the bed's head, and the other at the feet, who, while he slept, were working some embroidery, and observed a profound silence. She who sat at the bed's head, and whose name was Nur-nihar, perceived the Caliph was asleep, whispered to the other, called Nagmatos Sohi, "There is great news. The commander of the believers, our master, will be overjoyed when he awakes, and hears what I have to tell him. Fetnah is not dead. She is in perfect health." "Oh heavens!" cried Nagmatos Sohi, in a transport of joy. "Is it possible that the beautiful, the charming, the incomparable Fetnah should still be among the living?" She uttered these words with so much vivacity, and so loud, that the Caliph awoke. He asked why they had disturbed his rest. "Alas, my sovereign lord," answered the slave, "pardon me this indiscretion. I could not, without transport, hear that Fetnah is still alive. It caused such emotion in me as I could not suppress." "What then is become of her?" demanded the Caliph, "if she is not dead?" "Chief of the believers," replied the other, "I this evening received a note from a person unknown, written with Fetnah's own hand. She gives me an account of her melancholy adventure, and orders me to acquaint you with it. I thought fit, before I fulfilled my commission, to let you take some few moments' rest, believing you must stand in need of it after your fatigue, and—" "Give me that note," said the Caliph, interrupting her eagerly. "You were wrong to defer delivering it to me." The slave immediately presented to him the note, which he opened with much impatience, and in it Fetnah gave a particular account of all that had befallen her, but enlarged a little too much on the attentions of Ghanim. The Caliph, who was naturally jealous, instead of being provoked at the inhumanity of Zubaydah, was more concerned at the infidelity he fancied Fetnah had been guilty of towards him. "Is it so?" said he, after reading the note. "The perfidious wretch has been 4 months with a young merchant, and has the effrontery to boast of his attention to her. 30 days are past since my return to Baghdad, and she now thinks of sending me news of herself. Ungrateful creature! Whilst I spend the days in bewailing her, she passes them in betraying me. Go to, let us take vengeance of a bold woman, and that bold youth who affronts me." Having spoken these words, and went into a hall where he used to appear in public and give audience to his court. The first gate was opened, and immediately all the courtiers, who were waiting without, entered. The Grand Vizier came in, and prostrated himself before the throne. Then rising, he stood before his master, who, in a tone which denoted he would be instantly obeyed, said to him, "Jafir, your presence is requisite, for putting in execution an important affair I am about to commit to you. Take 400 men of my guards with you, and first inquire where the merchant of Damascus lives, whose name is Ghanim, the son of Abu Ayyub. When you have learned this, repair to his house, and cause it to be razed to the foundations. But first secure Ghanim, and bring him hither with my slave Fetnah, who has lived with him these 4 months. I will punish her, and make an example of that insolent man who has presumed to fail in respect to me." The Grand Vizier, having received this positive command, made a low prostration to the Caliph, having his hand on his head, in token that he would rather lose it than disobey him, and departed. The first thing he did was to send to the syndic of the dealers in foreign stuffs and silks, with strict orders to find out the house of the unfortunate merchant. The officer he sent with these orders brought him back word that he had scarcely been seen for some months, and no man knew what could keep him at home if he was there. The same officer likewise told Jafir where Ghanim lived. Upon this information, that minister, without losing time, went to the judge of the police, whom he caused to bear him company, and attended by a great number of carpenters and masons, with the necessary tools for raising a house, came to Ghanim's residence, and finding it stood detached from any other, he posted his soldiers round it, to prevent the young merchant's making his escape. Fetnah and Ghanim had just dined. The lady was sitting at a window next to the street. Hearing a noise, she looked out through the lattice, and seeing the Grand Vizier approach with his attendants, concluded she was the object as well as Ghanim. She perceived her note had been received, but had not expected such a consequence, having hoped that the Caliph would have taken the matter in a different light. She knew not how long the prince had been returned from his campaign, and though she was acquainted with his jealous temper, yet apprehended nothing on that account. However, the sight of the Grand Vizier and the soldiers made her tremble, not indeed for herself, but for Ghanim. She did not question clearing herself, provided the Caliph would but hear her. As for Ghanim, whom she loved less out of gratitude than inclination, she plainly foresaw that his incensed rival might be apt to condemn him on account of his youth and person. Full of this thought, she turned to the young merchant and said, "Alas, Ghanim, we are undone." Ghanim looked through the lattice, and was seized with dread when he beheld the Caliph's guards with their naked scimitars, and the Grand Vizier with the civil magistrate at the head of them. At this sight he stood motionless, and had not power to utter one word. "Ghanim," said the favourite, "there is no time to be lost. If you love me, put on the habit of one of your slaves immediately, and disfigure your face and arms with soot. Then put some of these dishes on your head. You may be taken for a servant belonging to the eating house, and they will let you pass. If they happen to ask you where the master of the house is, answer without any hesitation that he is within." "Alas, madam," answered Ghanim, concerned for himself more than Fetnah, "you only take care of me. What will become of you?" "Let not that trouble you," replied Fetnah. "It is my part to look to that. As for what you leave in this house, I will take care of it, and I hope it will faithfully be restored to you when the Caliph's anger shall be over. But at present avoid his fury. The orders he gives in the heat of passion are always fatal." The young merchant's affliction was so great that he knew not what course to pursue, and he would certainly have suffered himself to be seized by the Caliph's soldiers had not Fetnah pressed him to disguise himself. He submitted to her persuasions, put on the habit of a slave, daubed himself with soot, and as they were knocking at the door, all they could do was embrace each other tenderly. They were both so overwhelmed with sorrow that they could not utter a word. Thus they parted. Ghanem went out with some dishes on his head. He was taken for the servant of an eating house, and no one offered to stop him. On the contrary, the Grand Vizier, who was the first that met him, gave way and let him pass, little thinking that he was the man he looked for. Those who were behind the Grand Vizier made way as he had done, and thus favored his escape. He soon reached one of the gates, and got clear of the city. Whilst he was making the best of his way from the Grand Vizier, that minister came into the room where Fetnah was sitting on a sofa, and where there were many chests full of Ghanem's clothes, and of the money he had made of his goods. As soon as Fetnah saw the Grand Vizier come into the room, she fell upon her face, and continuing in that posture, as it were to receive her death. "My lord," said she, "I am ready to undergo the sentence passed against me by the commander of the believers. You need only make it known to me." "Madam," answered Jafir, falling also down till she had raised herself, "God forbid any man should presume to lay profane hands on you. I do not intend to offer you the least harm. I have no farther orders than to entreat you will be pleased to go with me to the palace, and to conduct you thither, with the merchant that lives in this house." "My lord," replied the favourite, "let us go. I am ready to follow you. As for the young merchant, to whom I am indebted for my life, he is not here. He has been gone about a month since, to Damascus, whither his business called him, and has left these chests you see under my care till he returns. I conjure you to cause them to be carried to the palace, and order them to be secured, that I may perform the promise I made him to take all possible care of them." "You shall be obeyed," said Jafir, and immediately sent for porters, whom he commanded to take up the chests and carry them to Mesrur. As soon as the porters were gone, he whispered the civil magistrate, committing to him the care of seeing the house razed, but first to cause diligent search to be made for Ghanem, who, he suspected, might be hidden, notwithstanding what Fetnah had told him. He then went out, taking her with him, attended by the 2 slaves who waited on her. As for Ghanem's slaves, they were not regarded. They ran in among the crowd, and it was not known what became of them. No sooner was Jafir out of the house than the masons and carpenters began to demolish it, and did their business so effectively that in a few hours none of it remained. But the civil magistrate, not finding Ghanem after the strictest search, sent to acquaint the Grand Vizier before that minister reached the palace. "Well," said Harun al-Rashid, seeing him come into his closet, "have you executed my orders?" "Yes," answered Jafir, "the house Ghanem lived in is levelled with the ground, and I have brought you your favourite, Fetnah. She is at your closet door, and I will call her in if you command me. As for the young merchant, we could not find him, though every place has been searched, and Fetnah affirms that he has been gone a month to Damascus." Never was passion equal to that of the Caliph when he heard that Ghanem had made his escape. As for his favourite, believing that she had been false to him, he would neither see nor speak to her. "Mesrur," said he to the chief of the eunuchs, who was then present, "take the ungrateful and perfidious Fetnah, and shut her up in the dark tower." That tower was within the precinct of the palace, and commonly served as a prison for the favourites who any way offended the Caliph. Mesrur, being used to execute his sovereign's orders, however unjust, without making any answer, obeyed this with some reluctance. He signified his concern to Fetnah, who was the more grieved because she had assured herself that the Caliph would not refuse to speak to her. She was obliged to submit to her hard fate, and to follow Mesrur, who conducted her to the dark tower, and there left her. In the meantime, the enraged Caliph dismissed his Grand Vizier, and only hearkening to his passion, wrote the following letter with his own hand to the king of Syria, his cousin and tributary, who resided at Damascus. This letter is to inform you that a merchant of Damascus, whose name is Ghanem, the son of Abu Ayyub, has seduced the most amiable of my women slaves, called Fetnah, and is fled. It is my will that when you have read my letter, you cause search to be made for Ghanem, and secure him. When he is in your power, you shall cause him to be loaded with irons, and for 3 days successively let him receive 50 strokes of the bastinado. Then let him be led through all the parts of the city by a crier, proclaiming, "This is the smallest punishment the commander of the believers inflicts on him that offends his Lord, and debauches one of his slaves. After that you shall send him to me under a strong guard. It is my will that you cause his house to be plundered, and after it has been razed, order the materials to be carried out of the city into the middle of the plain. Besides this, if he has father, mother, sister, wives, daughters, or other kindred, cause them to be stripped, and when they are naked, expose them 3 days to the whole city, forbidding any person on pain of death to afford them shelter. I expect you will, without delay, execute my command." The Caliph, having written this letter, dispatched it by an express, ordering him to make all possible speed, and to take pigeons with him, that he might the sooner hear what had been done by Muhammad Zenabi. The pigeons of Baghdad have this peculiar quality, that from wherever they may be carried to, they return to Baghdad as soon as they are set at liberty, especially when they have young ones. A letter rolled up is made fast under their wing, and by that means advice is speedily received from such places as it is desired. The Caliph's courier traveled night and day, as his master's impatience required, and being come to Damascus, went directly to King Zenabi's palace, who sat upon his throne to receive the Caliph's letter. The courier having delivered it, Muhammad, looking at it, and knowing the hand, stood up to show his respect, kissed the letter, and laid it on his head, to denote he was ready submissively to obey the orders it contained. He opened it, and having read it, immediately descended from his throne, and without losing time mounted on horseback with the principal officers of his household. He sent for the civil magistrate, and went directly to Ghanem's house, attended by all his guards. Ghanem's mother had never received any letters from him since he had left Damascus, but the other merchants with whom he went to Baghdad were returned, and all of them told her they had left her son in perfect health. However, seeing he did not return, she could not but be persuaded that he was dead, and was so fully convinced of this in her imagination that she went into mourning. She bewailed Ghanem as if she had seen him die, and had herself closed his eyes. Never mother expressed greater sorrow, and so far was she from seeking any comfort that she delighted in indulging her grief. She had caused a dome to be built in the middle of the court belonging to her house, in which she placed a tomb. She spent the greatest part of the days and nights in weeping under that dome, as if her son had been buried there. Her daughter bore her company, and mixed her tears with hers. It was now some time since they had thus devoted themselves to sorrow, and the neighborhood, hearing their cries and lamentations, pitied such tender relations, when the king, Muhammad Zenabi, knocked at the door, which being opened by a slave belonging to the family, he hastily entered the house, inquiring for Ghanem, the son of Abu Ayyub. Though the slave had never seen King Zenabi, she guessed by his retinue that he must be one of the principal officers of Damascus. "My lord," said she, "that Ghanem you inquire for is dead. My mistress, his mother, is in that monument, lamenting him." The king, not regarding what was said by the slave, caused all the house to be diligently searched by his guards for Ghanem. He then advanced towards the monument, where he saw the mother and daughter sitting on a mat, and their faces appeared to him bathed in tears. These poor women immediately veiled themselves as soon as they beheld a man at the door of the dome. But the mother, knowing the king of Damascus, got up and ran to cast herself at his feet. "My good lady," said he, "I was looking for your son Ghanem. Is he here?" "Alas, sir," cried the mother, "it is a long time since he has ceased to be." Would to God I had at least put him into his coffin with my own hands, and had had the comfort of having his bones in this monument. Oh, my son, my dear son!" She would have said more, but was oppressed with such violent sorrow that she was unable to proceed. Zinebi was moved, for he was a prince of a mild nature, and had much compassion for the sufferings of the unfortunate. If Ghanem alone be guilty, thought he to himself, why should the mother and the daughter, who are innocent, be punished? Ah, cruel Harun al-Rashid, what a mortification do you put upon me in making me the executioner of your vengeance, obliging me to persecute persons who have not offended you. The guards whom the king had ordered to search for Ghanem came and told him their search had been in vain. He was fully convinced of this. The tears of those two women would not leave him any room to doubt. It distracted him to be obliged to execute the caliph's order. "My good lady," said he to Ghanem's mother, "quit this monument with your daughter. It is no place of safety for you." They went out, and he, to secure them against any insult, took off his own robe and covered them both with it, bidding them keep close to him. He then ordered the populace to be let in to plunder, which was performed with the utmost rapaciousness, and with shouts which terrified Ghanem's mother and sister the more, because they knew not the reason. The rabble carried off the richest goods, chests full of wealth, fine Persian and Indian carpets, cushions covered with cloth of gold and silver, fine chinaware. In short, all was taken away, till nothing remained but the bare walls of the house, and it was a dismal spectacle for these unhappy ladies to see all their goods plundered, without knowing why they were so cruelly treated. When the house was plundered, Muhammad ordered the civil magistrate to raise the house and monument, and while that was doing, he carried away the mother and daughter to his palace. There it was he redoubled their affliction by acquainting them with the caliph's will. "He commands me," said he to them, "to cause you to be stripped and exposed naked for 3 days to the view of the people. It is with the utmost reluctance that I execute such a cruel and ignominious sentence." The king delivered these words with such an air as plainly made it appear his heart was really pierced with grief and compassion. Though the fear of being dethroned prevented his following the dictates of his pity, yet he in some measure moderated the rigor of the caliph's orders, by causing large shifts, without sleeves, to be made of coarse horsehair for Ghanem's mother and his sister. The next day these two victims of the caliph's rage were stripped of their clothes, and their horsehair shifts put upon them. Their headdress was also taken away, so that their dishevelled hair hung floating on their backs. The daughter had the finest hair, and it hung down to the ground. In this condition they were exposed to the people. The civil magistrate, attended by his officers, were along with them, and they were conducted through the city. A crier went before them, who every now and then cried, "This is the punishment due to those who have drawn on themselves the indignation of the commander of the believers." Whilst they walked in this manner along the streets of Damascus, with their arms and feet naked, clad in such a strange garment, and endeavoring to hide their confusion under their hair, with which they covered their faces, all the people were dissolved in tears. More especially the ladies, considering them as innocent persons, as they beheld them through their lattice windows, and being particularly moved by the daughter's youth and beauty, they made the air ring with their shrieks as they passed before their houses. The very children, frightened at those shrieks and at the spectacle that occasioned them, mixed their cries with the general lamentation. In short, had an enemy been in Damascus putting all to fire and sword, the consternation could not have been greater. It was near night when this dismal scene concluded. The mother and daughter were both conducted back to King Muhammad's palace. Not being used to walk barefoot, they were so spent that they lay a long time in a swoon. The Queen of Damascus, highly afflicted at their misfortunes, notwithstanding the caliph's prohibition to relieve them, sent some of her women to comfort them with all sorts of refreshments and wine to recover their spirits. The queen's women found them still in a swoon, and almost past receiving any benefit by what they offered them. However, with much difficulty, they were brought to themselves. Ghanem's mother immediately returned them thanks for their courtesy. "My good madam," said one of the queen's ladies to her, "we are highly concerned at your affliction, and the Queen of Syria, our mistress, has done us a favor in employing us to assist you. We can assure you that princess is much afflicted at your misfortunes, as well as the king, her consort." Ghanem's mother entreated the queen's women to return her majesty 1,000 thanks for her and her daughter, and then directing her discourse to the lady who spoke to her, "Madam," said she, "the king has not told me why the chief of the believers inflicts so many outrages on us. Pray be pleased to tell us what crimes we have been guilty of." "My good lady," answered the other, "the origin of your misfortunes proceeds from your son Ghanem. He is not dead, as you imagine. He is accused of having seduced the beautiful Fetnah, the best beloved of the caliph's favorites. But, having by flight withdrawn himself from that prince's indignation, the punishment is fallen on you. All condemn the caliph's resentment, but all fear him. And you see King Zinebi himself dares not resist his orders, for fear of incurring his displeasure. All we can do is to pity you, and exhort you to have patience." "I know my son," answered Ghanem's mother. "I have educated him carefully, and in that respect which is due to the commander of the believers. He cannot have committed the crime which he is accused of. I dare answer for his innocence. But I will cease to murmur and complain, since it is for him that I suffer, and he is not dead. Oh, Ghanem," added she in a transport of affection and joy, "my dear son Ghanem, is it possible that you are still alive? I am no longer concerned for the loss of my fortune, and how harsh and unjust soever the caliph's orders may be, I forgive him, provided heaven has preserved my son. I am only concerned for my daughter. Her sufferings alone afflict me, yet I believe her to be so good a sister as to follow my example." On hearing these words, the young lady, who till then had appeared insensible, turned to her mother, and clasping her arms about her neck, "Yes, dear mother," said she, "I will always follow your example, whatever extremity your love for my brother may reduce us to." The mother and daughter, thus interchanging their sighs and tears, continued a considerable time in such moving embraces. In the meantime, the queen's women, who were much affected at the spectacle, omitted no persuasions to prevail with Ghanem's mother to take some sustenance. She ate a morsel out of complaisance, and her daughter did the like. The caliph, having ordered that Ghanem's kindred should be exposed 3 days successively to the sight of the people in the condition already mentioned, the unhappy ladies afforded the same spectacle the second time next day, from morning till night. But that day and the following, the streets, which at first had been full of people, were now quite empty. All the merchants, incensed at the ill usage of Abu Ayyub's widow and daughter, shut up their shops and kept themselves close within their houses. The ladies, instead of looking through their lattice windows, withdrew into the back parts of their houses. There was not a person to be seen in the public places through which those unfortunate women were carried. It seemed as if all the inhabitants of Damascus had abandoned their city. On the 4th day, the king, resolving punctually to obey the caliph's orders, though he did not approve of them, sent criers into all quarters of the city to make proclamation, strictly commanding all the inhabitants of Damascus, and strangers, of what condition soever, upon pain of death, and having their bodies cast to the dogs to be devoured, not to receive Ghanem's mother and sister into their houses, or give them a morsel of bread, or a drop of water, and, in a word, not to afford them the least support, or hold the least correspondence with them. When the criers had performed what the king had enjoined them, that prince ordered the mother and the daughter to be turned out of the palace, and left to their choice to go where they thought fit. As soon as they appeared, all persons fled from them, so great an impression had the late prohibition made upon all. They easily perceived that everybody shunned them, but not knowing the reason, were much surprised, and their amazement was the greater, when coming into any street, or among any persons, they recollected some of their best friends, who immediately retreated with as much haste as the rest. "What is the meaning of this?" said Ghanem's mother. "Do we carry the plague about us? Must the unjust and barbarous usage we have received render us odious to our fellow citizens?" "Come, child," added she, "let us depart from Damascus with all speed. Let us not stay any longer in a city where we are become frightful to our very friends." The two wretched ladies, discoursing in this manner, came to one of the extremities of the city, and retired to a ruined house to pass the night. Thither some Mussulmans, out of charity and compassion, resorted to them after the day was shut in. They carried them provisions, but durst not stay to comfort them, for fear of being discovered, and punished for disobeying the Caliph's orders. In the meantime, King Zinebi had let fly a pigeon to give the Caliph an account of his exact obedience. He informed him of all that had been executed, and conjured him to direct what he would have done with Ghanem's mother and sister. He soon received the Caliph's answer in the same way, which was, that he should banish them from Damascus forever. Immediately the king of Syria sent men to the old house, with orders to take the mother and daughter, and to conduct them 3 days' journey from Damascus, and there to leave them, forbidding them ever to return to the city. Zinebi's men executed their commission, but being less exact than their master in the strict performance of the Caliph's orders, they, in pity, gave the wretched ladies some small pieces of money, and each of them a scrip, which they hung about their necks to carry their provisions. End of section 33. Recording by John Scott Jones, Milwaukee, Wisconsin, June 29, 2007. Section 34 of the Arabian Nights Entertainments, Volume 1. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by John Scott Jones. The Arabian Nights Entertainments, Volume 1, by Anonymous, translated by Dr. Jonathan Scott, Section 34. In this miserable state, they came to the first village. The peasants' wives flocked about them, and, as it appeared through their disguise that they were people of some condition, asked them what was the occasion of their traveling in a habit that did not seem to belong to them. Instead of answering the question, they fell to weeping, which only served to heighten the curiosity of the peasants, and to move their compassion. Ghanem's mother told them what she and her daughter had endured, at which the good countrywomen were sensibly afflicted, and endeavored to comfort them. They treated them as well as their poverty would permit, took off their horsehair shifts, which were very uneasy to them, and put on them others which they gave them, with shoes and something to cover their heads, and save their hair. Having expressed their gratitude to these charitable women, Jalib al-Qulub and her mother departed from that village, taking short journeys towards Aleppo. They used at dusk to retire near or into the mosques, where they passed the night on the mat, if there was any, or else on the bare pavement, and sometimes rested in the public places appointed for the use of travelers. As for sustenance, they did not want, for they often came to places where bread, boiled rice, and other provisions are distributed to all travelers who desire it. At length they came to Aleppo, but would not stay there, and continuing their journey towards the Euphrates, crossed the river and entered Mesopotamia, which they traversed as far as Mosul. Thence, notwithstanding all they had endured, they proceeded to Baghdad. That was the place they had fixed their thoughts upon, hoping to find Ghanem, though they ought not to have fancied that he was in a city where the Caliph resided. But they hoped, because they wished it, their affection for him increasing instead of diminishing with their misfortunes. Their conversation was generally about him, and they inquired for him of all they met. But let us leave Jalib al-Qulub and her mother, and return to Fetnah. She was still confined closely in the dark tower, since the day that had been so fatal to Ghanem and herself. However disagreeable as her prison was to her, it was much less grievous than the thoughts of Ghanem's misfortune, the uncertainty of whose fate was a killing affliction. There was scarcely a moment in which she did not lament him. The Caliph was accustomed to walk frequently at night within the enclosure of his palace, for he was the most inquisitive prince in the world, and sometimes, by those night walks, came to the knowledge of things that happened in his court, which would otherwise never have reached his ear. One of those nights, in his walk, he happened to pass by the dark tower, and fancying he heard somebody talk, stopped, and drawing near the door to listen, distinctly heard these words, which Fetnah, whose thoughts were always on Ghanem, uttered with a loud voice. "O Ghanem, too unfortunate Ghanem, where are you at this time? Whither has thy cruel fate led thee? Alas, it is I that have made you wretched. Why did you not let me perish miserably rather than afford me your generous relief? What melancholy return have you received for your care and respect? The commander of the faithful, who ought to have rewarded, persecutes you, and in requital for having always regarded me as a person reserved for his bed, you lose your fortune, and are obliged to seek for safety in flight. O Caliph, barbarous Caliph, how can you exculpate yourself when you shall appear with Ghanem before the tribunal of the supreme judge, and the angels shall testify the truth before your face? All the power you are now invested with, and which makes almost the whole world tremble, will not prevent your being condemned and punished for your violent and unjust proceedings." Here Fetnah ceased her complaints, her sighs and tears putting a stop to her utterance. This was enough to make the Caliph reflect. He plainly perceived that if what he had heard was true, his favorite must be innocent, and that he had been too hasty in giving such orders against Ghanem and his family. Being resolved to be rightly informed in an affair which so nearly concerned him in point of equity, on which he valued himself, he immediately returned to his apartment, and that moment ordered Mesrour to repair to the dark tower and bring Fetnah before him. By this command, and much more by the Caliph's manner of speaking, the chief of the eunuchs guessed that his master designed to pardon his favorite and take her to him again. He was overjoyed at the thought, for he respected Fetnah, and had been much concerned at her disgrace. Therefore, flying instantly to the tower, "Madam," said he to the favorite, with such an air as expressed his satisfaction, "be pleased to follow me. I hope you will never more return to this melancholy abode. The commander of the faithful wishes to speak with you, and I draw from this a happy omen." Fetnah followed Mesrour, who conducted her into the Caliph's closet. She prostrated herself before him, and so continued, her face bathed in tears. "Fetnah," said the Caliph, without bidding her rise, "I think you charge me with violence and injustice. Who is he that, notwithstanding the regard and respect he had for me, is in a miserable condition? Speak freely. You know the natural goodness of my disposition, and that I love to do justice." By these words, the favorite was convinced that the Caliph had heard what she had said, and availed herself of so favorable an opportunity to clear Ghanem. "Commander of the true believers," said she, "if I have let fall any word that is not agreeable to your majesty, I most humbly beseech you to forgive me. But he whose innocence and wretched state you desire to be informed of is Ghanem, the unhappy son of Abu Ayyub, late a rich merchant of Damascus. He saved my life from a grave, and afforded me a sanctuary in his house. I must own that from the first moment he saw me, he perhaps designed to devote himself to me, and conceived hopes of engaging me to admit his love. I guess at this, by the eagerness which he showed in entertaining me, and doing me all the good offices I so much wanted under the circumstances I was then in. But as soon as he heard that I had the honor to belong to you, 'Ah, madam,' said he, 'that which belongs to the master is forbidden to the slave.' From that moment, I owe this justice to his virtue to declare, his behavior was always suitable to his words. You, commander of the true believers, well know with what rigor you have treated him, and you will answer for it before the tribunal of God." The Caliph was not displeased with Fetnah for the freedom of these words. "But may I," said he, "rely on the assurance you give me of Ghanem's virtue?" "Yes," replied Fetnah, "you may. I would not for the world conceal the truth from you, and to prove to you that I am sincere, I must make a confession, which perhaps may displease you, but I beg pardon of your majesty beforehand." "Speak, daughter," said Harun al-Rashid. "I forgive you all, provided you conceal nothing from me." "Well then," replied Fetnah, "let me inform you that Ghanem's respectful behavior, joined to all the good offices he did me, gained him my esteem. I went further yet. You know the tyranny of love. I felt some tender inclination rising in my breast. He perceived it, but far from availing himself of my frailty, and notwithstanding the flame which consumed him, he still remained steady in his duty, and all that his passion could force from him were the words I have already repeated to your majesty: that which belongs to the master is forbidden to the slave. This ingenuous confession might have provoked any other man than the Caliph, but it completely appeased that prince. He commanded her to rise, and making her sit by him, "Tell me your story," said he, "from the beginning to the end." She did so, with artless simplicity, passing slightly over what regarded Zubaydah, and enlarging on the obligation she owed to Ghanem, but above all, she highly extolled his discretion, endeavoring by that means to make the Caliph sensible that she had been under the necessity of remaining concealed in Ghanem's house to deceive Zubaydah. She concluded with the young merchant's escape, which she plainly told the Caliph she had compelled him to, so that he might avoid his indignation. When she had done speaking, the Caliph said to her, "I believe all you have told me, but why was it so long before you let me hear from you? Was there any need of staying a whole month after my return before you sent me word where you were?" "Commander of the true believers," answered Fetnah, "Ghanem went abroad so very seldom that you need not wonder we were not the first that heard of your return. Besides, Ghanem, who took upon him to deliver the letter I wrote to Nur an-Nihar, was a long time before he could find an opportunity of putting it into her own hands." "It is enough, Fetnah," replied the Caliph. "I acknowledge my fault, and would willingly make amends for it, by heaping favors on the young merchant of Damascus. Consider therefore what I can do for him. Ask what you think fit, and I will grant it." Hereupon the favorite fell down at the Caliph's feet with her face to the ground, and rising again, said, "Commander of the true believers, after returning your majesty thanks for Ghanem, I most humbly entreat you to cause it to be published throughout your dominions that you pardon the son of Abu Ayyub, and that he may safely come to you." "I must do more," rejoined the prince, "in requital for having saved your life, and the respect he has strewn for me, to make amends for the loss of his fortune. In short, to repair the wrong I have done to himself and his family, I give him to you for a husband." Fetnah had no words expressive enough to thank the Caliph for his generosity. She then withdrew into the apartment she had occupied before her melancholy adventure. The same furniture was still in it, nothing had been removed, but that which pleased her most was, to find Ghanem's chest and bales, which Mesrour had received the Caliph's orders to convey thither. The next day, Harun al-Rashid ordered the Grand Vizier to cause proclamation to be made throughout all his dominions, that he pardoned Ghanem, the son of Abu Ayyub, but this proved of no effect, for a long time elapsed without any news of the young merchant. Fetnah concluded that he had not been able to survive the pain of losing her. A dreadful uneasiness seized her mind, but as hope is the last thing which forsakes lovers, she entreated the Caliph to give her leave to seek for Ghanem herself, which being granted, she took a purse containing 1,000 pieces of gold, and went one morning out of the palace, mounted on a mule from the Caliph's stables, very richly caparisoned. Black eunuchs attended her, with a hand placed on each side of the mule's back. Thus she went from mosque to mosque, bestowing her alms among the devotees of the Mohammedan religion, desiring their prayers for the accomplishment of an affair on which the happiness of 2 persons, she told them, depended. She spent the whole day and the 1,000 pieces of gold in giving alms at the mosques, and returned to the palace in the evening. The next day she took another purse of the same value, and in like equipage as the day before, went to the square of the jewelers' shops, and stopping at the gateway without alighting, sent one of her black eunuchs for the syndic, or chief of them. The syndic, who was a most charitable man and spent above 2/3 of his income in relieving poor strangers, sick or in distress, did not make Fetnah wait, knowing by her dress that she was a lady belonging to the palace. "I apply myself to you," said she, putting the purse into his hands, "as a person whose piety is celebrated throughout the city. I desire you to distribute that gold among the poor strangers you relieve, for I know you make it your business to assist those who apply to your charity. I am also satisfied that you prevent their wants, and that nothing is more grateful to you than to have an opportunity of relieving their misery." "Madam," answered the syndic, "I shall obey your commands with pleasure. But if you desire to exercise your charity in person, and will be pleased to step to my house, you will see there 2 women worthy of your compassion. I met them yesterday as they were coming into the city. They were in a deplorable condition, and it moved me the more because I thought they were persons of rank. Through all the rags that covered them, notwithstanding the impression the sun has made on their faces, I discovered a noble air, not to be commonly found in those people I relieve. I carried them both to my house and delivered them to my wife, who was of the same opinion with me. She caused her slaves to provide them good beds, while she herself led them to our warm bath and gave them clean linen. We know not yet who they are, because we wish to let them take some rest before we trouble them with our questions. Fetnah, without knowing why, felt a curiosity to see them. The syndic would have conducted her to his house, but she would not give him the trouble, and was satisfied that a slave should show her the way. She alighted at the door, and followed the syndic's slave, who had gone before to give notice to his mistress, she then being in the chamber with Jalib al-Kulub and her mother, for they were the persons the syndic had been speaking of to Fetnah. The syndic's wife, being informed by the slave that a lady from the palace was in her house, was hastening to meet her. But Fetnah, who had followed the slave, did not give her time. On her coming into the chamber, the syndic's wife prostrated herself before her to express the respect she had for all who belonged to the caliph. Fetnah raised her up and said, "My good lady, I desire you will let me speak to those 2 strangers that arrived at Baghdad last night." "Madam," answered the syndic's wife, "they lie in those beds you see by each other." The favorite immediately drew near the mothers, and offering her carefully, "Good woman," said she, "I come to offer you my assistance. I have considerable interest in this city, and may be of service to you and your companion." "Madam," answered Ghanim's mother, "I perceive by your obliging offers that heaven has not quite forsaken us, though we had cause to believe it had, after so many misfortunes as have befallen us." Having uttered these words, she wept so bitterly that Fetnah and the syndic's wife could not forbear letting fall some tears. The caliph's favorite, having dried up hers, said to Ghanim's mother, "Be so kind as to tell us your misfortunes, and recount your story. You cannot make the relation to any persons better disposed to use all possible means to comfort you." "Madam," replied Abu Ayyub's disconsolate widow, "a favorite of the commander of the true believers, a lady whose name is Fetnah, is the occasion of all our misfortunes." These words were like a thunderbolt to the favorite, but suppressing her agitation and concern, she suffered Ghanim's mother to proceed in the following manner. "I am the widow of Abu Ayyub, a merchant of Damascus. I had a son called Ghanim, who, coming to trade at Baghdad, has been accused of carrying off Fetnah. The caliph caused search to be made for him everywhere, to put him to death. But not finding him, he wrote to the king of Damascus to cause our house to be plundered and razed, and to expose my daughter and myself 3 days successively naked to the populace, and then to banish us out of Syria forever. But how unworthy soever our usage has been, I should still be comforted were my son alive, and I could meet with him. What a pleasure would it be for his sister and me to see him again. Embracing him, we should forget the loss of our property, and all the evils we have suffered on his account. Alas, I am fully persuaded he is only the innocent cause of them, and that he is no more guilty towards the caliph than his sister and myself." "No doubt of it," said Fetnah, interrupting her there. "He is no more guilty than you are. I can assure you of his innocence, for I am that very Fetnah you so much complain of, who through some fatality in my stars have occasioned you so many misfortunes. To me you must impute the loss of your son if he is no more. But if I have occasioned your misfortune, I can in some measure relieve it. I have already justified Ghanim to the caliph, who has caused it to be proclaimed throughout his dominions that he pardons the son of Abu Ayyub, and doubt not he will do you as much good as he has done you injury. You are no longer his enemies. He waits for Ghanim to requite the service he has done me by uniting our fortunes. He gives me to him for his consort. Therefore, look on me as your daughter, and permit me to vow eternal duty and affection." Having so said, she bowed down on Ghanem's mother, who was so astonished that she could return no answer. Fetnah held her long in her arms, and only left her to embrace the daughter, who, sitting up, held out her arms to receive her. When the Caliph's favorite had strewn the mother and daughter all tokens of affection, as Ghanem's wife, she said to them, "The wealth Ghanem had in this city is not lost. It is in my apartment in the palace. But I know all the treasure in the world cannot comfort you without Ghanem, if I may judge of you by myself. Blood is no less powerful than love in great minds. But why should we despair of seeing him again? We shall find him. The happiness of meeting with you makes me conceive fresh hopes. Perhaps this is the last day of your sufferings, and the beginning of a greater felicity than you enjoyed in Damascus, when Ghanem was with you." Fetnah would have proceeded, but the syndic of the jewelers, coming in, interrupted her. "Madam," said he to her, "I come from seeing a very moving object. It is a young man, whom a camel driver had just carried to an hospital. He was bound with cords on a camel, because he had not strength enough to sit. They had already unbound him, and were carrying him into the hospital when I happened to pass by. I went up to the young man, viewed him attentively, and fancied his countenance was not altogether unknown to me. I asked him some questions concerning his family and his country, but all the answers I could get were sighs and tears. I took pity on him, and being much used to care for sick people, perceived that he had need to have particular care taken of him. I would not permit him to be put into the hospital, for I am too well acquainted with their way of managing the sick, and am sensible of the incapacity of the physicians. I have caused him to be brought to my own house by my slaves, and they are now in a private room where I placed him, putting on some of my own linen, and treating him as they would do myself." Fetnah's heart beat at these words of the jeweler, and she felt a sudden emotion for which she could not account. "Show me," said she to the syndic, "into the sick man's room. I should be glad to see him." The syndic conducted her, and whilst she was going thither, Ghanem's mother said to Jalib al-Kulub, "Alas, daughter, wretched as that sick stranger is, your brother, if he be living, is not perhaps in a more happy condition." The Caliph's favorite, coming into the chamber of the sick stranger, drew near the bed in which the syndic's slaves had already laid him. She saw a young man, whose eyes were closed, his countenance pale, disfigured, and bathed in tears. She gazed earnestly on him, her heart beat, and she fancied she beheld Ghanem. But yet she would not believe her eyes. Though she found something of Ghanem in the objects she beheld, yet in other respects he appeared so different that she durst not imagine it was he that lay before her. Unable, however, to withstand the earnest desire of being satisfied, "Ghanem," said she, with a trembling voice, "is it you I behold?" Having spoken these words, she stopped to give the young man time to answer, but observing that he seemed insensible, "Alas, Ghanem," added she, "it is not you that I address. My imagination, being overcharged with your image, has given to a stranger a deceitful resemblance. The son of Abu Ayyub, however indisposed, would know the voice of Fetnah." At the name of Fetnah, Ghanem, for it was really he, opened his eyes, sprang up, and knowing the Caliph's favorite, "Ah, madam," said he, "by what miracle?" He could say no more. Such a sudden transport of joy seized him that he fainted away. Fetnah and the syndic did all they could to bring him to himself, but as soon as they perceived he began to revive, the syndic desired the lady to withdraw, lest the sight of her should heighten his disorder. The young man, having recovered, looked all around, and not seeing what he sought, exclaimed, "What has become of you, charming Fetnah? Did you really appear before my eyes, or was it only an illusion?" "No, sir," said the syndic, "it was no illusion. It was I that caused the lady to withdraw, but you shall see her again as soon as you are in a condition to bear the interview. You now stand in need of rest, and nothing ought to obstruct your taking it. The situation of your affairs is altered, since you are, as I suppose, that Ghanem, in favor of whom the commander of the true believers has caused a proclamation to be made in Baghdad, declaring that he forgives him what is past. Be satisfied, for the present, with knowing so much. The lady, who just now spoke to you, will acquaint you with the rest. Therefore think of nothing but recovering your health. I will contribute all in my power towards it." Having spoke these words, he left Ganem to take his rest, and went himself to provide for such medicines as were proper to recover his strength, exhausted by hard living and toil. During this time, Fetnah was in the room with Jalib al-Kulub and her mother, where almost the same scene was acted all over again. For when Ghanem's mother understood that the sick stranger whom the syndic had brought into the house was Ghanem himself, she was so overjoyed that she also swooned away, and when, with the assistance of Fetnah and the syndic's wife, she was again come to herself, she would have arisen to go and see her son. But the syndic coming in hindered her, representing that Ghanem was so weak and emaciated that it would endanger his life to excite in him those emotions which must be the consequence of the unexpected sight of a beloved mother and sister. There was no occasion for the syndic's saying any more to Ghanem's mother. As soon as she was told that she could not converse with her son without hazarding his life, she ceased insisting to go and see him. Fetnah then said, "Let us bless heaven for having brought us all together. I will return to the palace to give the Caliph an account of these adventures, and tomorrow morning I will return to you." This said, she embraced the mother and the daughter and went away. As soon as she came to the palace, she sent Mesrur to request a private audience of the Caliph, which was immediately granted, and being brought into the prince's closet where he was alone, she prostrated herself at his feet, with her face on the ground according to custom. He commanded her to rise, and having made her sit down, asked whether she had heard any news of Ghanem. "Commander of the true believers," said she, "I have been so successful that I have found him, and also his mother and sister." The Caliph was curious to know how she had discovered them in so short a time, and she satisfied his inquiries, saying so many things in commendation of Ghanem's mother and sister, he desired to see them as well as the young merchant. Though Harun al-Rashid was passionate, and in his heat sometimes guilty of cruel actions, yet he was just, and the most generous prince in the world when the storm of anger was over, and he was made sensible of the wrong that he had done. Having therefore no longer cause to doubt but that he had unjustly persecuted Ghanem and his family, and had publicly wronged them, he resolved to make them public satisfaction. "I am overjoyed," he said to Fetnah, "that your search has proved so successful. It is a real satisfaction to me, not so much for your sake as for my own. I will keep the promise I have made you. You shall marry Ghanem, and I here declare you are no longer my slave. You are free. Go back to that young merchant, and as soon as he has recovered his health, you shall bring him to me with his mother and sister." The next morning early, Fetnah repaired to the syndic of the jewelers, being impatient to hear of Ghanem's health, and tell the mother and daughter the good news she had for them. The first person she met with was the syndic, who told her that Ghanem had rested well that night, and that his disorder proceeding altogether from melancholy, the cause being removed, he would soon recover his health. Accordingly, the son of Abu Ayyub was speedily much amended. Rest and the good medicines he had taken, but above all the different situation of his mind, had wrought so good an effect that the syndic thought he might without danger see his mother, his sister, and his mistress, provided he was prepared to receive them, because there was ground to fear that, not knowing his mother and sister were at Baghdad, the sight of them might occasion too great a surprise and joy. It was therefore resolved that Fetnah should first go alone into Ghanem's chamber, and then make a sign to the other two ladies to appear when she thought it was proper. Matters being so ordered, the syndic announced Fetnah's coming to the sick man, who was so transported to see her that he was again near fainting away. "Well, Ghanem," said she, drawing near to his bed, "you have again found your Fetnah, whom you thought you had lost forever." "Ah, madam," exclaimed he, eagerly interrupting her, "what miracle has restored you to my sight? I thought you were in the Caliph's palace. He has doubtless listened to you. You have dispelled his jealousy, and he has restored you to his favor." "Yes, my dear Ghanem," answered Fetnah, "I have cleared myself before the commander of the true believers, who, to make amends for the wrong he has done you, bestows me on you for a wife." These last words occasioned such an excess of joy in Ghanem that he knew not for a while how to express himself otherwise than by that passionate silence so well known to lovers. At length he broke out into these words: "Beautiful Fetnah, may I give credit to what you tell me? May I believe that the Caliph really resigns you to Abu Ayyub's son?" "Nothing is more certain," answered the lady. "The Caliph, who before caused search to be made for you to take away your life, and who in his fury caused your mother and your sister to suffer 1,000 indignities, desires now to see you, that he may reward the respect you had for him, and there is no question but that he will load your family with favors." Ghanem asked what the Caliph had done to his mother and sister, which Fetnah told him, and he could not forbear letting fall some tears at the relation, notwithstanding the thoughts which arose in his mind at the prospect of being married to his mistress. But when Fetnah informed him that they were actually in Baghdad, and in the same house with him, he appeared so impatient to see them that the favorite could no longer defer giving him the satisfaction, and accordingly called them in. They were at the door waiting for that moment. They entered, went up to Ghanem, and embracing him in their turns, kissed him 1,000 times. What tears were shed amidst those embraces! Ghanem's face was bathed with them, as well as his mother's and sister's, and Fetnah let fall abundance. The syndic himself and his wife were so moved at the spectacle that they could not forbear weeping, nor sufficiently admire the secret workings of Providence, which had brought together into their house 4 persons whom fortune had so cruelly persecuted. When they had dried up their tears, Ghanem drew them afresh by the recital of what he had suffered from the day he left Fetnah, till the moment the syndic brought him to his house. He told them that having taken refuge in a small village, he there fell sick, that some charitable peasants had taken care of him, but finding he did not recover, a camel driver had undertaken to carry him to the hospital at Baghdad. Fetnah also told them all the uneasiness of her imprisonment, how the Caliph, having heard her talk in the tower, had sent for her into his closet, and how she had cleared herself. In conclusion, when they had related what accidents had befallen them, Fetnah said, "Let us bless heaven, which has brought us all together again, and let us think of nothing but the happiness that awaits us. As soon as Ghanem has recovered his health, he must appear before the Caliph with his mother and sister, but I will go and make some provision for them." This said, she went to the palace, and soon returned with a purse containing 1,000 pieces of gold, which she delivered to the syndic, desiring him to buy apparel for the mother and daughter. The syndic, who was a man of a good taste, chose such as were very handsome, and had them made up with all expedition. They were finished in 3 days, and Ghanem, finding himself strong enough, prepared to go abroad. But on the day he had appointed to pay his respects to the Caliph, while he was making ready with his mother and sister, the Grand Vizier, Jafir, came to the syndic's house. He had come on horseback, attended by a great number of officers. "Sir," said he to Ghanem, as soon as he entered, "I am come from the commander of the true believers, my master and yours. The orders I have differ much from those which I do not wish to revive in your memory. I am to bear you company, and to present you to the Caliph, who is desirous to see you." Ghanem returned no other answer to the vizier's compliment than by profoundly bowing his head, and then mounted a horse brought from the Caliph's stables, which he managed very gracefully. The mother and daughter were mounted on mules belonging to the palace, and whilst Fetnah on another mule led them by a byway to the prince's court, Jafir conducted Ghanem and brought him into the hall of audience. The Caliph was sitting on his throne, encompassed with emirs, viziers, and other attendants and courtiers, Arabs, Persians, Egyptians, Africans, and Syrians of his own domains, not to mention strangers. When the vizier had conducted Ghanem to the foot of the throne, the young merchant paid his obeisance, prostrating himself with his face to the ground, and then rising, made a handsome compliment in verse, which, though the effusion of the moment, met with the approbation of the whole court. After this compliment, the Caliph caused him to approach, and said, "I am glad to see you, and desire to hear from your own mouth where you found my favorite, and all that you have done for her." Ghanem obeyed, and appeared so sincere that the Caliph was convinced of his veracity. He ordered a very rich vest to be given to him, according to the custom observed towards those who are admitted to audience, after which he said to him, "Ghanem, I will have you live in my court." "Commander of the true believers," answered the young merchant, "a slave has no will but his master's, on whom his life and fortune depend." The Caliph was highly pleased with Ghanem's reply, and assigned him a considerable pension. He then descended from his throne, and causing only Ghanem and the Grand Vizier follow him, retired into his own apartment. Not questioning but that Fetnah was in waiting, with Abu Ayyub's widow and daughter, he caused them to be called in. They prostrated themselves before him. He made them rise, and was so charmed by Jalib al-Qulub's beauty, that after viewing her very attentively, he said, "I am so sorry for having treated your charms so unworthily, that I owe them such a satisfaction as may surpass the injury I have done. I take you to wife, and by that means shall punish Zubaydah, who shall become the first cause of your good fortune, as she was of your past sufferings. This is not all," added he, turning toward Ghanem's mother. "You are still young. I believe you will not disdain to be allied to my Grand Vizier. I give you to Jafir, and you, Fetnah, to Ghanem. Let a qazi and witnesses be called, and the 3 contracts be drawn up and signed immediately." Ghanem would have represented to the Caliph that it would be honor enough for his sister to be one of his favorites, but he was resolved to marry her. Harun thought this such an extraordinary story, that he ordered his historiographer to commit it to writing with all its circumstances. It was afterwards laid up in his library, and many copies being transcribed, it became public. End of section 34. Recording by John Scott Jones, Milwaukee, Wisconsin, July 20th, 2007. End of the Arabian Nights Entertainments, Volume 1, by Anonymous, translated by Dr. Jonathan Scott.